Hello there and welcome back to the Sleep Science. Tonight you and I are venturing into the folds and flickers of your own mind, the 3 pounds of warm wrinkled mystery that hums behind your eyes. Picture it now, a glimmering forest of neurons stretching in every direction, each one whispering to thousands of others in flashes of soft blue light. Every thought you've ever had, every face you've ever remembered, every pang of embarrassment at 3 a.m, they all shimmer in here, weaving their little electric stories. You probably won't survive this, at least not unchanged, because once you glimpse how your brain truly works, there's no unknowing it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start at the outer edge of awareness, sliding into the delicate architecture of grey and white matter. It feels alive, pulsing faintly under some unseen rhythm. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian embalmers truly believed the brain was useless. They famously scooped it out with a hook while preserving the heart as the seat of the soul. Ironically, that same worthless mush now runs your breathing, your heartbeat, your sense of time, and even the skepticism you feel when someone says we only use 10% of it. We use all of it, sorry, Hollywood. Up close, each neuron looks like a tiny tree, a central trunk called the soma, branching dendrites catching signals like radio antennas, and a long axon stretching outward to whisper into the next neuron's ear. There are about 86 billion of these miniature trees in your head, roughly one for every star in a small galaxy. Together, they fire electrical bursts so fast that your brain generates enough voltage to power a dim light bulb. Not that it's a great idea to plug yourself into anything. As you drift deeper into this luminous forest, you can almost hear the static crackle of thought. A sensory neuron flares because your eyelid twitches. A motor neuron responds, deciding whether to scratch that itch or let it fade. The entire dance happens faster than you can consciously perceive, your body acting before your mind even knows it's made a decision. The brain, it seems, is a democracy run by lightning. Somewhere ahead, a spark leaps a synapse, a microscopic gap smaller than the thickness of a hair's split end. That spark isn't electricity crossing empty space, but chemistry at play. Neurotransmitters released, received, recycled. Serotonin, dopamine, glutamate, each with its own rhythm, its own secret message. If neurons are the trees, these molecules are gossiping birds flitting between them, spreading news, rumours, and occasionally chaos. You pause beneath a cluster of neurons that seem brighter than the rest. These are pyramidal cells of the cerebral cortex, the outer layer that lets you dream, plan, speak, and doubt. Evolution decided this wrinkled, folded sheet should wrap around the rest of the brain like a blanket around a sleeping child. Every wrinkle saves space, packing more processing power into your skull. Dolphins and elephants share this trick, their convoluted corticas curling tighter than a cinnamon roll. The smooth brains of small mammals look oddly bare by comparison, as if nature hadn't finished sculpting them. A tiny electric storm swirls near your temple. Somewhere in that pattern lies the memory of your first bicycle ride, the wind, the panic, the sudden triumph. The brain stores not just the facts, but the sensations and emotions that tagged along. If one neuron goes quiet, another takes up the signal. That resilience, the redundancy of billions, is why you can survive small injuries, concussions, or even a night of regrettable karaoke. Still, this command center has its quirks. Did you know that Albert Einstein's brain was, physically, only a little smaller than average? Yet pathologists noted unusually dense connections in his parietal lobes, regions linked to visual reasoning. Historians still argue whether his genius came from anatomy, upbringing, or just relentless curiosity. It's comforting to imagine that brilliance isn't housed in size, but in the poetry of connection, in how the brain loops one idea to another until something new storms sparks. The deeper you go, the more it feels like wandering through a living city at night. Highways of axons gleam like illuminated roads, clusters of neurons pulse like neighbourhoods. Every second, billions of messages race through this landscape without colliding. A single neuron might talk to 10,000 others, making you, effectively, a biological internet, one that updates itself every moment you're alive. the latency is almost zero. Your ping time to reality is unbeatable. And then there's the fringe rumour that neurons can somehow store memories in quantum states, that consciousness might be more than just electrochemistry. Most scientists raise an eyebrow at this, but the idea lingers, floating somewhere between philosophy and science fiction. Whether true or not, it reminds you how little we still understand about the universe inside your skull. A faint humour stirs. You wonder if your brain knows you're inside it right now, exploring itself like a tourist reading its own travel blog. It probably does. Metacognition, thinking about thinking, is one of the brain's party tricks. The organ not only processes the world, but also narrates its own processing, giving rise to the voice in your head that just said, "Wait, this is weird," and you drift past a neuron firing erratically, like a strobe light gone rogue. Epileptic seizures begin when such electrical rhythms lose coordination, turning the symphony into chaos. Yet astonishingly, after most seizures, normal order resumes. Neurons fall back into time as though an unseen conductor tapped his baton. The fragility and resilience coexist here, side by side. Somewhere beyond, glial cells bustle quietly. They're the brain's unsung janitors and engineers, outnumbering neurons by nearly 2 to 1. Once dismissed as mere glue, glia guide newborn neurons, clean up neurotransmitters, and even join the conversation when things get lively. Historians of science still argue whether early neuroscientists ignored them because they didn't fire like neurons, or because they was too boring to study. Turns out they were never boring at all, they were just humble. The temperature drops slightly, the rhythmic hum deepens. You feel a pulse that isn't yours. It's the slow throb of cerebrospinal fluid washing away waste, bathing the brain in protection and nutrients. It's the quiet housekeeping that keeps the lights on. Imagine a nighttime janitor sweeping up broken thoughts, mopping the residue of yesterday's stress. For a moment, everything stills. You sense what billions of neurons sense, a constant background awareness that hums beneath every thought, every breath. This is the base frequency of being, the static between channels when you can almost hear yourself exist. It's oddly comforting, like realizing the universe hums too. The forest of neurons glows around you again, brighter now, alive and whispering. And as you exhale, you understand something simple yet vast. The brain isn't just where you live, it is you in all your contradictions and curiosities. The neurons keep sparking, the thoughts keep blooming, and for tonight, that's enough. You glide deeper into the folds of your brain, past the shimmering neuron forest and into a landscape that feels almost geological. Ridges, valleys, and rippling canyons of grey matter. The surface of your brain, the cerebral cortex, looks like the ocean froze mid-wave. Each fold or gyrus crests toward the skull, while each valley or sulcus sinks like a riverbed. It's an odd design choice for evolution, beautiful but strange. You trace your imaginary fingertips across those ridges, feeling how the terrain curls inward as though it's trying to conserve space. Your skull, after all, is finite real estate, and the wrinkles are your brain's answer to a housing crisis. If the brain was smooth, like that of a mouse or a newborn dolphin, you'd be far less capable of complex thought. The wrinkles pack more neurons into the same space, allowing greater processing power without requiring a larger head, something evolution decided might make childbirth awkward. Historians still argue whether early phrenologists, the 19th century enthusiasts who measured skull bumps to read personality, were delusional or just charmingly wrong. Either way, their strange science at least showed how fascinated humanity was with the idea that the brain's shape could mirror the soul. You keep moving, sliding past the parietal lobe's mountain range, brushing against the occipital lobe's glowing cliffs where vision translates from light to thought. It's warm here, alive with photons turned into perception. You blink, and that flicker becomes a neural event. Electrical impulses darting from the back of your skull toward the front, announcing that light has entered the world. Your eyes are technically part of your brain, just extended outward like curious periscopes. No wonder staring at a sunset can make you feel like you're seeing through your mind rather than with it. A faint vibration hums beneath you, and you realize it's the prefrontal cortex, the region that lets you plan, reason, and most importantly, overthink things at 2 a.m. Scientists sometimes call it the executive center of the brain, which sounds very serious until you remember how often that same region talks you into buying unnecessary gadgets online. The prefrontal cortex evolved to imagine futures, weigh risks, and delay gratification, but it's also responsible for your spiral of what-ifs. Without it, you might live more impulsively, maybe even happily. With it, you can dream, strategize, and accidentally rehearse arguments that never happened. A little further down lies the temporal lobe, the quiet archivist of sound and memory. When music plays, neurons here light up in synchronized waves, decoding rhythm and melody. A mainstream fact: when a song gets stuck in your head, neuroscientists call it an earworm, a repetitive loop that your auditory cortex refuses to shut off. The quirkier theory: some suggest earworms evolved as mental rehearsal, a kind of self-tuning mechanism to sharpen auditory memory. Whether that's true or just poetic pseudoscience, you can thank this lobe for the mysterious persistence of that one chorus you can't forget. You drift across the brain's midline, feeling how the two hemispheres mirror each other. Almost. The left handles most of your language and linear logic, while the right plays with imagery, tone, and intuition. But the cliché of left-brained versus right-brained people doesn't quite hold. Neuroscientists still debate whether specialization is that simple. fMRI scans show that both hemispheres light up for almost every complex task. The brain doesn't divide its labor like a company, it freelances. Between those halves lies the corpus callosum, a thick cable of neural fibers connecting both sides. If the hemispheres were siblings, this would be their phone line. Electrical messages sprint across it at breathtaking speeds, around 250 miles per hour. Surgeons once cut this bridge in severe epilepsy cases to stop seizures from spreading, and afterwards some patients displayed eerie duality. One hand would button a shirt while the other unbuttoned it. It was as though two minds were negotiating control of one body. The phenomenon remains one of neuroscience's most haunting paradoxes: how much of you exists when your brain splits its own awareness. A faint, cool breeze brushes past your senses, though there's no air here, just electrical sewn silence. It's the cerebrospinal fluid circulating through the brain's grooves, cushioning it from the bone. A quirky historical tidbit: medieval scholars once believed this clear liquid was spiritus animalis, the animal spirit that carried thought. They imagined bubbles of intelligence floating through the ventricles, ferrying sensations and emotions. The idea was wrong, of course, but it captured something accidentally true. Thought does move like a current, rippling invisibly from place to place. You hover near the thalamus, the grand relay station buried deep in the centre. Every sensation except smell passes through this hub before reaching consciousness. It's the gatekeeper of awareness, deciding what to show you and what to hide. Without it, the world would arrive all at once, every sound, touch and sight overwhelming your senses like an orchestra tuning at full volume. Sometimes, during migraines or certain seizures, the thalamus falters and that unfiltered flood returns. Victims describe it as unbearable brightness, as if reality itself were shouting. Nearby, the hypothalamus hums, a pea-sized regulator that controls hunger, thirst, temperature, and hormones. Despite its size, it's the brain's backstage manager, keeping the show running smoothly. When you skip lunch or stay up too late, this little knot of tissue throws a quiet tantrum, sending signals that turn you cranky and irrational. You might blame your mood, but it's really ancient circuitry screaming for balance. Historians still argue whether early yogis and mystics, who mastered breathing and hunger control, had unknowingly tapped this same center long before science named it. You pause at the cerebellum, nestled low at the back, its surface densely folded like coral. Every step you take, every blink, every subtle motion of your fingers when you type or draw, this small but mighty structure fine-tunes it all. When intoxicated, it's one of the first regions alcohol disrupts, explaining that wobbly walk and terrible dance coordination. You can tell your cerebellum cheers, though it probably won't respond. Then there's the brainstem, the most ancient part connecting you to every creature that's ever lived. It's the reptilian relic that keeps you breathing, your heart beating, your reflexes firing even in sleep. If consciousness is the crown, the brainstem is the spine's throne room. It doesn't dream, argue, or write poetry, it just keeps you alive. In evolutionary time, it's billions of years old. Older than mammals, older than bones. The same pattern of nerves beating rhythm into life has persisted since fish first took water into gills. All around you, billions of connections fire quietly. You sense it like static before lightning, a whispering hum that stretches through time. Every ridge and wrinkle is there for efficiency, for elegance, for survival. Without those folds, your brain would need to be the size of a small suitcase to do what it does now, which admittedly would make hats a problem. The brain isn't pretty by human standards, more lumpy pudding than divine sculpture, but there's beauty in its function. Each wrinkle is a signature of evolution's patience, each groove a testament to necessity. You stand among them surrounded by ripples of light and realize that even the most ordinary thought, a shopping list, a daydream, the urge to yawn, requires the synchronized ballet of millions of cells firing in perfect time. As the glow dims, you linger one last moment in this wrinkled terrain. The folds breathe, expand, and contract like the chest of a sleeping giant. And as you drift upward, you can't help but smile, because for all its squish and strangeness, this command center of yours is exquisite. You drift sideways now into the gentle divide that splits your world in two, the left hemisphere and the right. The boundary between them isn't a wall, but a shimmering river of fibers, glinting like moonlit threads. You hover above it, feeling the subtle tension that makes you, you. On one side logic hums, on the other imagination sighs. The old myth claims one hemisphere writes spreadsheets while the other paints sunsets, but the truth, as always, is messier and far more interesting. The left hemisphere pulses with rhythm and order. Here, neurons line up like diligent clerks, processing syntax, math, patterns, and sequences. It's the side that corrects your grammar mid-sentence, the side that insists you double-check the stove before leaving the house. Meanwhile, the right hemisphere, glows softer, looser, more interpretive, like jazz improvising around a theme. It handles faces, spatial awareness, music, the sense of metaphor. When you stand in awe of a starry night, the right brain leans in and whispers, "Wow." The left, ever practical, calculates the distance to the nearest constellation. You can feel both halves working even now, two voices humming in duet. Sometimes they argue, sometimes they dance. Neuroscientists call this lateralization, the division of tasks between hemispheres, but most modern imaging studies reveal the partnership is closer than pop psychology admits. Each hemisphere contributes to almost every mental act, even those we once labelled left or right. Historians still argue whether the 1960s fascination with hemispheric dominance, spurred by split-brain research, oversimplified the findings or simply gave us a neat cultural metaphor. Either way, the myth stuck like glitter on a science fair poster. You drift lower, gliding toward the great cable that joins the two halves, the corpus callosum again, now seen from within. It resembles a gleaming suspension bridge, 200 million axons strong, swaying under the constant traffic of thought. Electrical impulses race both ways, coordinating sensation, movement, and meaning. The left hemisphere might recognize a word, the right might feel its emotion. Together, they form language not just as data, but as experience. Cut the bridge, and the world fractures, each half of the brain perceiving, but unable to share. A strange experiment from the 1970s flickers around you, replayed in ghostly light. Researchers flash the word key to a patient's left eye, thus right hemisphere, and ring to the right eye, left hemisphere. When asked to speak, the patient said ring, the left hemisphere's domain of speech. But when asked to point to what they saw, their left hand chose a key. Two separate perceptions, two partial truths housed in one skull. You can almost hear the irony humming in the synapses. The left brain, articulate but blind. The right, perceptive but mute. A quirky historical tidbit. Some early neurologists believed left-handed people were more creative because their right hemisphere supposedly took over. It's half true, left-handers often show more balanced hemispheric communication, but the stereotype grew wildly romanticized. Pop magazines in the 80s declared lefties born artists, ignoring how many brilliant scientists, engineers, and accountants also wielded pens with their left hands. The brain, it turns out, doesn't care about handedness so much as connectivity. And no, being ambidextrous doesn't mean you're secretly a genius. It just means your motor cortex likes options. You wander along the left hemisphere's interior wall. Here lies Broca's area, a small yet mighty patch responsible for speech production. Each syllable you form is sculpted here from the neural level up. Just behind it, Wernicke's area takes over, decoding meaning, so words don't just sound right, they make sense. When these regions misfire, speech can twist into beautiful chaos. Sentences fluent but meaningless, or thoughts coherent but unspeakable. Language, that fragile miracle, hangs on a few cubic centimeters of tissue. Across the divide, the right hemisphere listens for tone and rhythm, the emotional color behind the words. It knows when someone's joking, when irony sharpens, when silence speaks louder than speech. Together, the two halves form conversation itself, logic wrapped in melody. You realize, amused, that even when you argue with yourself, you're technically just holding an interhemispheric conference. No minutes are ever taken. Below, the hemispheres share another meeting place, the limbic system. It's older, more instinctive, less divided. Here, the amygdala and hippocampus whisper across the midline, swapping memories and feelings. The hemispheres may disagree on politics or poetry, but the limbic core reminds them what it feels like to be alive. You sense that pulse, emotion pulsing under reason, reason shaping emotion in return. Scientists once believed that severing the corpus callosum produced two separate consciousnesses, like twins sharing a skull. Later studies complicated that view. The hemispheres still cooperate in subtle, subcortical ways. Perhaps the self is more like a choir than a soloist, different voices harmonizing so well that we mistake the blend for one sound. And maybe that's what consciousness is, perfect synchronization mistaken for unity. You pause near the midline, noticing tiny flashes along the anterior commissure, a smaller bridge connecting emotional centers. Even when the main bridge is damaged, this little detour keeps the hemispheres chatting, like siblings passing notes under a door. Evolution never trusts one solution. It leaves backups everywhere. A faint joke crosses your mind, perhaps sent from the left hemisphere, the one that loves puns. If the right brain paints and the left writes, it says, then who's paying the rent? You chuckle softly, feeling the two halves agree on that at least. Humour, interestingly, draws on both hemispheres. The left passes structure, the right delivers the punchline. It's a truce disguised as laughter. The hemispheres thrum now like stereo speakers in perfect sync. You feel depth in the sound, a sense of dimension you hadn't noticed before. Without both sides, reality would flatten. Colourless logic on one end, formless sensation on the other. Together, they create stereo consciousness, the full surround sound of being human. You remember reading once about the corpus callosum's subtle gender differences, how it's slightly thicker, on average, in women, possibly allowing more cross-communication. Theories abound, from improved multitasking to emotional fluency, though modern researchers warn against exaggerating. Still, you like the image, thought flowing freely, intuition and analysis intertwined. The truth likely lies not in anatomy, but in the symphony of use. And then, as if on cue, a quiet debate begins between your own hemispheres. The left asks what time it is, the right ignores the question, watching the neural light show unfold. You float between them, content to let both be right in their own ways. The glowing bridge below hums brighter, sending one last cascade of signals across the divide. Logic meets art, precision meets wonder. And somewhere in the middle of that collision, you happen. You move forward, slipping deeper into the labyrinth of your own mind until the lights begin to dim, the air thickens, and you realize you've entered memory itself. It doesn't look like a filing cabinet or a server farm. It feels alive, like a city at dusk. Pathways glow and fade in unpredictable patterns. Somewhere faint whispers replay moments from years ago. The sound of rain on a tin roof, the laugh of someone you can't quite picture anymore, the taste of something swore and almost forgotten. This is the hippocampus, curled delicately like a seahorse on each side of your brain, storing the story of who you've been. The hippocampus is small, barely the size of your thumb, but it's one of the busiest neighbourhoods in this city of thought. Without it, your present would dissolve moment to moment like chalk drawings in the rain. Every experience passes through here before becoming a long-term memory. You can almost feel the transfer process. Neurons tagging experiences with emotional highlights, embedding them into patterns that might last a lifetime or fade by morning. Historians still argue whether ancient philosophers like Aristotle guessed at this function when they spoke of the soul's wax tablet, a surface impressed by experience and worn smooth by time. The mainstream fact: when this area is damaged, memories simply stop forming. The case of Henry Molaison, once known only as Patient HM, proved it beyond doubt. After surgeons removed parts of his hippocampus to treat epilepsy, he could remember his past but never create new long-term memories. Each day began fresh, every conversation a first encounter. He'd meet his doctor, smile warmly, then 5 minutes later, meet him again. The tragedy became a revelation. Memory isn't stored in one place, but begins in this small shimmering core before scattering across the cortex like seeds on the wind. As you drift through this glowing chamber, you notice the memories forming like constellations. A neuron lights up at the scent of coffee. Another glows for your childhood bedroom, its posters and soft clutter preserved in ghostly detail. Strands of axons link these sparks, weaving them into an intricate web. You realize that memory isn't static, it's alive. Every time you recall something, the neural path rewires slightly, reshaping the past like wet clay. The version of your first kiss you remember tonight isn't the same one you remembered last year. It's been edited, coloured by a mood and time, maybe made kinder or sharper. Your memory is a brilliant liar, but a loving one. A quirky fringe theory whispers through the synapses that memories might not even reside solely in the brain. Some researchers have speculated, controversially, that the body itself stores emotional traces in muscles and organs, a cellular memory. The idea remains unproven and often dismissed, yet anyone who's ever felt anxiety tighten their stomach or nostalgia tingle in their chest might sympathise with the notion that remembering is a full-body experience. Still, most neuroscientists roll their eyes and point back to the hippocampus, quietly confident that the mind's archives stay up here, behind the eyes, in electrical code. The deeper you go, the more the hippocampus begins to look like a library built of light. Shelves rise and fall, lined with flickering neurons that hum softly, like pages rustling. You reach out and brush one. An old memory from school unfolds, vivid and immediate. The smell of chalk, the hum of fluorescent lights, the quiet panic before being called to the board. It feels real enough to step into, but if you do, you risk overwriting it. The act of remembering is also the act of rewriting. That's why eyewitnesses contradict themselves, why nostalgia paints everything in softer light. The brain edits the past as tenderly as a film director, touching up an old scene. You notice other memories, ones you thought were gone, hovering just out of reach. They're not lost, only buried under newer neural growth. Sleep helps prune and preserve them. During REM, the brain replays important experiences, deciding which to keep and which to discard. It's the brain's version of spring cleaning, though it sometimes misfiles things. That's why you might remember every lyric of a 90s pop song, but forget where you left your keys 10 minutes ago. As you explore, a corridor flickers with brighter light. Emotion-laced memories burn hotter. Here, the amygdala joins the conversation, tagging memories with feelings: fear, joy, shame, love. You feel a familiar pang the way one scent can instantly summon childhood, or how a single song can reopen a heartbreak. The amygdala and hippocampus work together like a director and a screenwriter. One decides what's important, the other records it for later reruns. Historians still argue whether medieval thinkers like St. Augustine, who described the vast palaces of memory, somehow sensed this network before anatomy could reveal it. His poetic vision wasn't far off. Vast halls filled with images, voices, even smells, all slumbering until the mind knocks on their door. You do the same now, walking slowly through your own archive, brushing dust from moments long sealed. And then, you find a blank space, an area where neurons haven't connected yet. This is potential memory, the future waiting to be written. The hippocampus is constantly shaping new paths as you live and learn. Even in sleep, it's practicing. That's why dreams sometimes borrow fragments of real places and people. It's rehearsal, the hippocampus testing connections before saving them permanently. A recent study found that taxi drivers in London have larger hippocampi than average, likely from memorising that city's tangled streets. The brain grows its own map makers. As you move through the maze, you glimpse something odd, a looping, flickering image replaying itself endlessly. It's déjà vu. Scientists think it happens when the brain's memory and perception systems briefly overlap, tricking you into believing the present is a repeat performance. The feeling is eerie but harmless, a glitch in your temporal awareness. Some fringe theorists once called it proof of parallel timelines. Neuroscience, ever unromantic, calls it a temporal hiccup. You pass by older memories now, grainy, warm, frayed at the edges. They feel more like stories than experiences, softened by repetition. Memory, you realise, is not a vault but a living narrative. You rewrite your autobiography every time you tell it, consciously or not. That's why family gatherings often dissolve into debates about how it really happened. Everyone's brain is directing its own version of the film. Before leaving, you glance back. The hippocampus pulses quietly, steady and tireless. Even as you watch, it absorbs the moment, the sight of its own shimmering walls, the hum of neurons. You're remembering the act of remembering. The recursion is dizzying. Somewhere in this spiral of self-reference, identity takes root. Who you are isn't just your body, but the sum of everything you've chosen to keep. You drift upward, following a current of faint blue light, feeling each synapse pulse beneath you. Somewhere behind your eyes, a new memory is already forming. You, here, exploring this labyrinth, tracing the folds of the hippocampus, marveling that thought itself can dream of its own architecture. You rise from the hippocampus's glowing corridors and find yourself weightless in a soft violet mist. It swirls gently, fragrant with impossible dreams. The air hums, not with logic or memory, but with imagination. You realize where you've arrived. The threshold between waking and sleep, the brain's private cinema where reality blurs and the impossible becomes ordinary. This is the dream factory, that nightly illusion generator that turns the chaos of your day into surreal theatre. You can almost hear the audience settling in, the neurons dimming their lights, the subconscious cracking its knuckles, ready to direct another strange performance. Sleep isn't passive despite appearances. As you float deeper, waves of neural activity ripple beneath you, slow and rhythmic at first, then quickening. The first stages of sleep are like slipping beneath calm water. The conscious mind loosens its grip and your body sinks into rest. But then, after a cycle or two, something electric stirs. Your eyes, though closed, dart beneath their lids. Your pulse quickens. This is REM, rapid eye movement, where the dream factory roars to life. The brain becomes almost as active as when you're awake, yet your muscles remain paralyzed, locked safely in place so you don't act out whatever strangeness unfolds. Scientists have spent decades trying to decode this nightly mystery. One mainstream fact: most dreams last only 5 to 20 minutes. Though they can feel eternal, they're stitched together from fragments of memory, emotion, and sheer nonsense. Your brain's limbic system, the seat of feeling, goes into overdrive, while the prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic, mostly clocks out. That's why mid-dream it feels perfectly reasonable to chat with your childhood pet while riding an escalator through the ocean. Historians still argue whether early cultures truly believed dreams were messages from gods or simply the mind's nocturnal gossip. Ancient Egyptians recorded dreams on papyrus, treating them like letters from the divine. Freud millennia later called them the royal road to the unconscious, and modern neuroscience, it shrugs politely and admits, we still don't fully know. You pass through a swirling curtain of images, faces blending, colours bleeding into each other. Somewhere your amygdala fires, infusing the dream with emotion, fear, joy, desire, all exaggerated, unfiltered. The brain loves drama. It's as if your mind's inner playwright works for free, but insists on high production value. Even in absurdity, there's structure. Your hippocampus sneaks in fragments of the day, processing them, deciding what to keep. Dreams in their chaos help the brain tidy its thoughts. It's a messy but necessary ritual, like shaking the snow globe of your psyche to see what settles. A fringe theory floats by like a balloon. What if dreams aren't byproducts of memory, but windows into parallel realities? Some fringe dream researchers whisper that consciousness may wander into alternate versions of self each night, sampling possibilities. Most neuroscientists smile politely and point to the random firing of neurons in the ponds, but still, the idea lingers, because how else to explain the vividness, the weight, the truth you sometimes feel in a dream that fades to nonsense at sunrise? You drift through a familiar scene, your old kitchen, though the colours are off, slightly warmer, as though memory borrowed a painter's filter. On the counter sits an apple that hums faintly, and when you reach for it, and Samir, your hand passes through. Your brain doesn't care about physics right now. Dreams ignore consistency, they obey emotion. The apple isn't fruit, it's symbol, story, signal. Your subconscious loves metaphor as much as your waking mind loves logic. A soft laughter echoes behind you. Maybe it's someone you know, maybe it's just your temporal lobe misfiring. Either way, you turn and the dream shifts. The floor ripples into clouds, the ceiling dissolves into stars. Somewhere deep inside your skull, your occipital lobe is painting this scene in real time, using the same circuits that perceive the waking world. That's the eerie truth. Your brain doesn't know the difference between imagination and perception. It only knows experience. You glide toward a cluster of glowing neurons firing in rhythmic waves, the PGO spikes that herald REM sleep. They originate in the pons, sweep through the geniculate nucleus, then reach the occipital cortex, sparking the dream visuals. It's like watching an orchestra warm up before a concert. The rhythm is hypnotic, each note a burst of electrical energy. Dreams are not random, not entirely. They're coded rehearsals. The brain replays challenges, tests emotional reactions, simulates threats, and sometimes, for fun, just rewrites the laws of gravity. In one corner of the dream factory, a faint glow trembles, lucid dreaming territory. Here, the prefrontal cortex flickers back online, just enough for awareness to sneak in. You suddenly realize you're dreaming. The sensation is electric. You can fly, breathe underwater, rewrite the script. Some people train for years to master this, learning to recognize dream signs, clocks melting, hands with too many fingers, lights that refuse to switch. The ancient Tibetans practiced this as dream yoga, using lucidity to explore the nature of consciousness itself. You hover there for a moment, aware and yet adrift, a god in your own simulation. A gentle pulse from the amygdala reminds you that emotions still rule this realm. You think of fear, and shadows ripple along the edges of the dream. You laugh, and the darkness melts into colour. Your emotional state is the paintbrush, the dream, the canvas. The artistry is unintentional yet personal, an autobiography written in symbols and sound. Even nightmares, scientists say, have purpose. They desensitize you, letting the brain rehearse danger safely. The same neural circuits that govern fear by day perform their cathartic theatre by night. Historians still debate when humans first began interpreting dreams symbolically. The Epic of Gilgamesh mentions them. Joseph interpreted pharaohs in ancient Egypt. For centuries, the sleeping mind was seen as a messenger between worlds. Then came the skeptics, Descartes, Hobbes, who dismissed dreams as sensory leftovers. Today, both views coexist. Biology meets poetry, function meets mystery. You drift now through quieter dreams, the later cycles of the night. They grow longer, more narrative, more hopeful. Scientists note that REM periods lengthen as morning nears, which might explain why your most vivid dreams happen just before waking. The dream factory runs its best productions toward closing time. Somewhere, a bell rings softly, a neuron signaling the shift from REM to wakefulness. The dream begins to crumble, edges pixelating. You can feel consciousness tugging you back. But before you go, you look around one last time. You see the flickering montage of your mind's movie reel. Moments of love, fragments of fear, old memories disguised as new ones. The theatre darkens, the curtain falls, you awaken, but part of you stays behind. The dreaming part, still humming softly, feeding imagination, creativity, story. The dream factory never truly closes. It just waits for you to drift off again. You wake not in a bed, but in a flickering chamber lit with scarlet and gold, a living furnace deep in your mind. The walls pulse faintly, breathing emotion. Every sound feels amplified, every memory tinged with warmth or sharpness. You've stepped into the limbic system again. But tonight, you're standing in the amygdala, the brain's fiery core of feeling. Two almond-shaped knots, one in each hemisphere, constantly monitor the world for meaning. They don't think, they react, deciding before reason ever gets a vote whether something is threat or thrill, love or rage. You can almost feel it scanning you even now, measuring the tone of every heartbeat. The amygdala isn't just the home of fear, though that's its claim to fame. It also lights up for joy, curiosity, embarrassment, and that fizzy anticipation before good news. Evolution designed it as your built-in alarm system, but somewhere along the way, it became a theatre for every high-stakes emotion. Historians still argue whether ancient anatomists like Galen guessed its purpose when they spoke of the animal spirits that animated courage and terror alike. They didn't have microscopes, but they weren't wrong about its primal pull. A mainstream fact in modern imaging studies, The amygdala flares during emotional memories far more than neutral ones. That's why you can remember exactly where you were during a heartbreak or a moment of awe, but forget what you had for lunch yesterday. Emotion brands experience onto the hippocampus, searing it into permanence. You drift between the two regions now, watching sparks leap like fireflies, feeling made memory, memory feeding feeling in an endless loop. The amygdala's job isn't just to make you feel, it makes you act. When danger looms, it hijacks your system in milliseconds, flooding your body with adrenaline. Heart races, pupils widen, breath shortens. You call it anxiety, evolution calls it survival. Once, that reaction kept your ancestors alive when shadows hid predators. Now it kicks in when you open an email marked urgent. Your body doesn't know the difference between tiger and deadline. You wander deeper into the chamber. The flickering red fades into gentle amber. Here the amygdala's other half resides, the one tied to affection, bonding, even kindness. When someone hugs you or smiles sincerely, oxytocin courses through your system, soothing the alarm bells. The amygdala learns, slowly, that safety can be just as powerful as fear. Maybe that's why we chase comfort, why a familiar song or scent can dissolve tension instantly. Emotion is a pendulum, and your brain never stops swinging. Nearby, another structure joins the conversation, the hypothalamus again, receiving emotional orders and translating them into hormones. It's the messenger between feeling and flesh. Your cheeks flush, your palms sweat, your stomach knots, all on cue from this ancient alliance. Historians still argue whether emotion begins in the body or in the brain. William James once insisted we tremble first and feel fear after. Modern neuroscience shrugs and says both. The loop is continuous. Body and brain finish each other's sentences. A faint, quirky whisper ripples through the neural air, a memory of laughter. You realize humor too has its circuitry. The amygdala collaborates with the prefrontal cortex to detect incongruity, that spark when logic trips and absurdity wins. Maybe that's why laughter feels like a tiny explosion, fear and surprise detonating safely. Even the simplest joke, the amygdala walks into a bar, is your old brain's way of diffusing its own alarms. As you wander, you notice how the amygdala doesn't work alone. Above it, the orbitofrontal cortex monitors your reactions, asking quietly, "Was that appropriate?" Sometimes it approves, sometimes it shakes its head, embarrassed on your behalf. The partnership between impulse and restraint defines so much of the human life. Without it, emotion runs unchecked, like a wildfire. With too much restraint, everything burns cold. The balance shifts daily, sometimes hourly. No wonder feelings seem mercurial. In a shadowed corner of the chamber, neurons flicker with memories you'd rather not revisit. Trauma leaves deep grooves here, making the amygdala hypersensitive, prone to false alarms. That's why a scent, a sound, or a random phrase can yank you back to pain long past. Yet the brain can heal. Therapy, mindfulness, even deliberate breathing can retrain these circuits. Each calm breath tells the amygdala, "Stand down. We're safe now." Slowly, new pathways form, as if comfort itself were a learned language. You step closer to one glowing thread connecting amygdala to prefrontal cortex. Each end pulses alternately, emotion sending up signals, reason sending down reassurance. It's a constant negotiation. Neuroscientists once thought logic suppressed emotion. Now they see cooperation. You need both to make choices that matter. Pure logic builds bridges, pure emotion crossing them. Together they decide whether to fall in love, start a revolution, or simply eat dessert before dinner. A little historical detour flashes through the neurons. In the 17th century, philosopher Spinoza proposed that emotions were modes of thought, not enemies of reason, but expressions of it. Modern fMRI machines seem to nod in agreement. Even moral judgment lights the amygdala. Our ethics feel before they think. Perhaps conscience itself is the emotional intelligence in disguise. You sense how the amygdala's rhythm matches your heartbeat. The two synchronize, a feedback loop of pulse and passion. When calm, both slow, when alarmed, they sprint together. This connection is literal. Nerve fibers run directly between them. You wonder how many arguments, how many late-night anxieties, are simply misfired survival signals echoing in the wrong century. Then gently the heat subsides. the amber light turns rose gold. The amygdala hums more softly, like coals cooling after a storm. You can almost hear it sigh in relief knowing it's done its job. Emotion isn't the enemy, it's the compass, pointing you toward what matters. Without fear, you'd never seek safety. Without joy, you'd never chase meaning. You begin to drift upward toward quieter regions, feeling gratitude for the chaos you just witnessed. The amygdala remains below, still flickering, faintly, ready to rouse itself when life calls for heartbeats faster than thought. It doesn't rest, not really. It waits, a guardian, an alarm, a spark, and as you float away, you realize something. Maybe emotional balance isn't about silencing the amygdala, but learning to dance with it, to let it flare, cool flare again, trusting that your brain knows the rhythm of being alive. You glide upward from the molten glow of the amygdala into a cooler, more deliberate realm, the synaptic crossroads where emotion transforms into chemistry. The light here feels effervescent, tiny sparks leaping between invisible gaps. This is where your neurons gossip, argue, and occasionally throw parties, the synapses. The air tingles with microscopic chatter, molecules drifting from one side to the other, like digital messages on an invisible network. You've entered the grand marketplace of the mind, where neurotransmitters are the merchants and every mood has a price tag. You can almost hear the commerce, dopamine singing with manic enthusiasm, serotonin humming like a monk at sunrise, glutamate shouting directions, GABA gently shushing everyone when things get too loud. It's a living negotiation, and you, the so-called self, are just the sum of its compromises. Historians still argue whether ancient physicians like Hippocrates predicted this molecular orchestra when they spoke of the body's humours, blood, bile, phlegm and melancholy. They didn't know the words serotonin or acetylcholine, but they sensed that balance determined peace and imbalance invited storms. A mainstream fact, dopamine doesn't create happiness itself, it creates wanting. It's the molecule of pursuit, not satisfaction, the chemical whisper that says, almost there. Every time you scroll through social media, dopamine pulses in tiny doses, promising reward but never delivering closure. Your brain, the eternal optimist, falls for it every time. Meanwhile, serotonin handles the long game, contentment, stability. That sigh after a good meal or a kind conversation. The two often compete. Dopamine drags you to the dance floor. Serotonin reminds you to rest afterward. As you watch, vesicles release bursts of neurotransmitters into the synaptic gap, the tiny ocean separating one neuron from the next. Receptors on the far shore catch these molecules like hands clasping across a divide. Then, in microseconds, the transmitters vanish, either reabsorbed, broken down, or recycled for later. The efficiency is breathtaking. The entire exchange happens thousands of times per second across billions of synapses. If you could hear it as sound, it would be the softest thunderstorm in the universe. A fringe theory drifts by, shimmering like static. Some researchers once speculated that consciousness itself might arise from quantum effects in neurotransmission. That thought isn't purely electrical, but quantumly entangled. Most neuroscientists remain unconvinced, pointing out that the brain's warmth and wetness are terrible conditions for delicate quantum states. Still, the idea persists, charming dreamers with the notion that every spark of thought might ripple across the universe. You hover beside a single neuron firing repeatedly, watching calcium ions flood in and out like tides. Each pulse triggers the release of more messengers, each messenger tweaking your perception of reality. Caffeine, for example, blocks adenosine receptors, tricking your brain into feeling awake even as fatigue builds. Alcohol dampens glutamate and boosts GABA, making thoughts slur and inhibitions vanish. Nicotine, that sly manipulator, hijacks acetylcholine receptors, rewarding focus and relaxation simultaneously. Your moods, your habits, even your bad decisions, all are chemical stories told at lightning speed. In one corner, the neurotransmitters misbehave. Too much dopamine, and the world becomes vivid to the point of distortion, delusions blooming like bright weeds. Too little, and motivation withers into apathy. Too little serotonin, and sadness leaks into everything, painting even neutral days grey. Scientists developed SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, to keep serotonin longer in the gap, cushioning mood. It works for millions, but not for all. Historians still debate whether modern society's chemical fixes echo alchemy's ancient dream to distill the human soul into balance through mixtures and tonics. A faint hum of oxytocin rises around you, softer, sweeter. It's the molecule of bonding released during hugs, trust, and affection. You feel it now as if the neural world itself were embracing you. Yet oxytocin is double-edged. It fosters loyalty, yes, but also tribalism. It tells the brain who belongs and who doesn't. Chemistry, like humanity, has no moral bias. It amplifies whatever we choose. You glide toward a wider junction where a flood of endorphins shimmer. They're the body's homemade painkillers, opioids sculpted by evolution. When you run, laugh, or eat chocolate, these molecules trick your neurons into calm euphoria. It's biology's thank you note for surviving stress. The ancient Greeks might have called it catharsis. Oh, today we just call it a runner's high. Somewhere nearby, the prefrontal cortex lights up, its neurons bathed in dopamine as it plans, predicts, obsesses. You can feel the tug of wanting something just out of reach. Your mind conjures future rewards, imaginary outcomes. The chemistry behind ambition is both noble and exhausting. Dopamine never says enough. It's why great inventors stay up all night, why artists chase perfection, and why you sometimes scroll endlessly for that one satisfying post that never quite appears. You sense how delicate it all is, how even minor imbalances shift the colour of your reality. A poor night's sleep reduces serotonin and spikes cortisol, tilting perception toward gloom. One comforting conversation reverses it instantly. The neurochemical sea is fickle but responsive, like weather in fast forward. Understanding it doesn't make you immune to storms, but it does teach you to carry an umbrella. You watch a single synapse flare brilliantly. Dopamine crossing the divide, binding, releasing, rebounding. In that moment, an idea is born. Maybe it's small, an image, a word, the impulse to make tea. Yet every innovation, every song lyric, every aha moment starts here, between two microscopic shores. It's humbling to think that art and anxiety, courage and craving, all arise from the same invisible handshake. A quick joke from your inner voice bubbles up. If neurotransmitters were people, dopamine would throw surprise parties, serotonin would clean up afterward, and GABA would dim the lights, asking everyone to keep it down. It's silly, but oddly accurate. The balance of these personalities is what keeps your mental house in order. You realize now that the brain isn't ruled by a single conductor, but by chemistry and constant improvisation. The mood of the day, the clarity of thought, the rhythm of creativity, all are chemical weather patterns shifting by the minute. Understanding that doesn't reduce magic. It is the magic. Life as alchemy, every emotion a new alloy. As you drift higher, the synaptic glow fades into a quieter silver haze. The chatter slows but never stops. Somewhere in that gentle static, your next thought is already forming, a chemical whisper waiting for spark and sense to meet. The air shifts again, cooler and brighter this time, until the faint crackle of chemical chatter gives way to a harmonic hum. You find yourself standing in what feels like a vast concert hall made of light and sound, the sensory cortex. The walls shimmer with colours you can't name. Vibrations ripple through the floor like ocean waves. This is where your brain turns chaos into coherence, where electricity becomes experience. You are not a person here. You are a living symphony, and every sense you possess plays its part in the orchestra. You can almost hear vision tuning up first, the visual cortex at the back of your skull humming with photons. Light enters your eyes as raw data, just wavelengths and contrast, then bounces through the optic nerves to the occipital lobe. There, neurons translate it into edges, motion, and eventually shape. Colour isn't out there in the world, it's here, born of your brain's interpretation. The sky isn't really blue, it's scattered light your cortex decided to paint that way. Historians still argue whether artists of the ancient world, like those in Homer's time, even saw colour as we do. Some scholars say their brains hadn't yet evolved to distinguish hues so vividly. Others think they simply described them differently, seeing metaphor instead of pigment. As you drift through the luminous hall, sound joins in, waves of vibration rippling across invisible space. The auditory cortex, nestled in the temporal lobes, catches those waves and decodes them into everything from thunder to whisper. The neurons fire in rhythmic bursts, each frequency assigned its own tiny neighbourhood. A low bass rumble lights the lower chambers. A high note twinkles above. Even silence has texture here. The brain fills gaps, inventing continuity. That's why a song stuck in your head still feels like it's playing. You're the orchestra now. Then comes touch, arriving like percussion, quick, grounding, unmistakable. The somatosensory cortex stretches across your brain's midline, mapping every inch of your body in miniature. Scientists call it the homunculus, a distorted figure representing your body's sensitivity. Huge lips, large hands, tiny torso. You imagine it now, floating before you, a surreal puppet of nerve endings. You can trace the line from fingertip to neuron, from warmth to comprehension. Even phantom sensations, like the itch of a missing limb, originate here when the brain's body map forgets to erase what's gone. A small, amused thought slips through. Your brain has never touched anything directly. It only interprets electrical signals from receptors in your skin, the feel of soft fabric, the chill of glass, the weight of gravity. They're all reconstructions. You've never truly felt the world, you've only felt your brain's best impression of it. Quirky and just a little unsettling. Taste and smell enter next, quieter but more primal. They bypass the usual sensory relay station, the thalamus, and head straight into limbic territory. That's why scents can ambush you with emotion. The perfume of someone long gone, the aroma of rain on hot pavement, the sweetness of bread triggering sudden tears. The olfactory bulb, evolution's ancient sense organ, still commands deep respect. Historians still argue whether perfumers and priests of old understood this instinctively when they burned incense in temples, not to please gods but to move minds. All around, the senses blend into one another. The orchestra no longer sounds separate. It becomes a single chord, sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, all harmonizing into your perception of reality. The technical term is multisensory integration, but standing here it feels more like magic. You can see music, taste color, feel the texture of sound. Some people actually do, synesthetes, whose sensory wiring overlaps more than usual. To them, numbers might glow with color, or names might taste like cinnamon. Neuroscientists still debate whether this is an anomaly or a glimpse into a more connected way of perceiving. In the far distance, a subtle rhythm begins. The vestibular system, your sense of balance, tucked deep in the inner ear. It sends tiny signals through the brainstem, telling you which way is up. Without it, you'd fall even standing still. Astronauts in orbit describe how losing that signal feels like existing inside a dream. No up, no down, just drifting consciousness. Your brain constantly negotiates gravity, translating physics into feeling. It's why spinning too fast makes you dizzy. The sensory orchestra goes out of tune for a moment, and the conductor panics. Speaking of conductors, you sense one now, the thalamus. It sits at the center like a calm maestro, ensuring every signal arrives in time. Each flicker of sensation passes through it, synchronized to the beat of consciousness. Except, of course, for smell, the diva of senses that insists on skipping rehearsal. You smile at the thought, your nose, the brain's rebellious artist. You drift closer to the sensory cortex's surface. Thousands of neurons flash in waves, forming living patterns that correspond to experience. If someone brushed your cheek right now, a tiny spark would bloom in the corresponding cortical patch. If you closed your eyes and imagined the touch, the same area would glow again, just softer. Imagination, it turns out, reuses the same neural circuits as reality. The difference between seeing and envisioning is one of intensity, not location. That's why daydreams can feel almost tactile, almost true. A quick joke from your inner voice cuts through. So when you say someone gets on your nerves, you're technically correct. You chuckle, the laughter vibrating through this mental concert hall. Humor lights up sensory areas too. Your brain processes tone and timing the way it does melody. Maybe that's why a well-timed joke feels musical. Toward the edges of the hall, the sensory waves fade into association areas, the brain's editors, where raw perception becomes meaning. A shadow isn't just contrast, it's an approaching stranger, a memory, a metaphor. The sensory data merges with imagination, emotion, and past experience. Perception becomes interpretation. Reality, then, is partly a hallucination you've agreed upon with yourself. Historians still argue whether philosophers like Descartes and Kant were right to claim that we never perceive the world directly, only through the filters of mind. Neuroscience, centuries later, nods gently in agreement. You live not in the universe itself, but in your brain's rendering of it, a model so convincing you rarely notice the illusion. The sensory orchestra swells one last time before quieting into stillness. You realize that every sight you've loved, every voice you've trusted, every gentle touch that comforted you, all of it began here as patterns of light and sound translated into understanding. The brain doesn't just process the world, it creates it anew each moment, like an artist endlessly repainting the same sunrise. You close your eyes within this vision, and for a heartbeat, you can almost hear the silence between sensations, the pause before the next note, the breath before thought. The orchestra waits, ready to play whatever reality you choose next. You drift from the concert hall of the senses into something quieter, but far more miraculous, a glowing construction site that never closes. The air hums with movement, scaffolding made of living light stretching from one neuron to the next. You've entered the realm of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change itself. It's not static grey matter at all. It's liquid architecture, constantly rewiring, rerouting, renewing. Every thought you have reshapes it, however slightly. You're both the sculptor and the sculpture, crafting yourself with each passing moment. At first, the landscape looks chaotic, axons growing like ivy, dendrites splitting into finer and finer twigs. Synapses flicker, strengthen, vanish, reappear somewhere new. This is how learning looks, messy, luminous, alive. When you practice a skill, say playing piano or parallel parking, the neural paths involved grow thicker, faster, more efficient. Neurons that fire together, wire together, as the old neuroscientist saying goes. You can almost see it now, twin bursts of light synchronizing, their bond tightening like friendship. Historians still argue whether early philosophers who spoke of habit as second nature were intuitively describing this same process long before microscopes proved it true. A mainstream fact: your brain produces new neurons even in adulthood, mainly in the hippocampus. For centuries, scientists thought you were born with all you'd ever have, use them or lose them. But the discovery of neurogenesis overturned that myth. Even now, as you listen, new neurons might be blooming, searching for connections. It's comforting, isn't it? Proof that you can grow again, even after the hardest years. You float closer to a cluster of forming connections. Tiny filaments reach out from one neuron toward another, hesitating, then touching. A spark leaps between them. You've just witnessed learning, the literal birth of understanding. It's humble and silent, yet this same mechanism has built languages, philosophies, symphonies. Every new skill is a physical transformation. Every failure prunes the network, making room for improvement. The brain is a gardener that knows beauty needs pruning as much as growth. A quirky tidbit ripples through. London taxi drivers, after mastering the city's 25,000 streets, show measurable enlargement in their hippocampi. Years of navigation literally reshaped their grey matter. So yes, when someone jokes that knowledge expands your mind, they are technically right. Meanwhile, violinists display increased cortical representation for their left-hand fingers, sculpted by endless practice. Your passions leave fingerprints on your brain's structure. You are, in the most literal sense, what you repeatedly do, but neuroplasticity isn't just about mastery. It's about survival. After strokes or injury, the brain reroutes signals through undamaged areas, finding new paths like water around a rock. It's how people relearn to speak, walk, even dream. This resilience astonishes researchers. Historians still argue whether ancient healers who used repetitive chants or gestures for rehabilitation accidentally harnessed this same rewiring process. The line between ritual and recovery might be thinner than anyone realized. You drift deeper and notice darker zones, neurons dimmed, pathways weak from disuse. These are habits forgotten, skills once sharp, now dull. The brain prunes what it doesn't need, recycling resources like a thrifty landlord. It's not cruelty, it's efficiency. But even lost circuits can regrow. Think of it as a muscle memory waiting to be retrained. The myth of fixed intelligence crumbles here. Adaptability is your brain's true genius. Somewhere nearby, glial cells move like patient gardeners, clearing debris, nourishing growth. They once were dismissed as mere support staff, but modern science knows better. Glia modulate learning, shape connections, and even influence emotions. One type, the astrocyte, stretches star-shaped arms across synapses, coordinating neural traffic. You feel a quiet reverence for them, the unsung custodians of thought, sweeping the brain's floors while neurons steal the spotlight. Neuroplasticity has its mischievous side, though. The same adaptability that lets you learn music can also cement anxiety or addiction. Repetition strengthens all circuits, good or bad. Every worry rehearsed, every scroll through the same app lays deeper tracks. The brain doesn't judge, it just obeys. But this also means you can teach it kindness, curiosity, calm. A single deep breath, practiced often, can begin rewiring centuries of fear encoded by ancestors. You pause near a glowing lattice where a neuron seems to split its attention, forming multiple synapses at once. It's multitasking, testing potential. Each branch reaches towards a meaning. One will succeed, the rest will fade. The process feels oddly familiar. The brain experimenting the way you do when you're trying to change your life. You imagine whispering encouragement to it. Keep going, little spark. Find your match. A fringe theory floats up from the neural mist. What if consciousness itself is plastic, expanding as its structure evolves? Some philosophers suggest that self-awareness might be the ultimate byproduct of adaptive rewiring, a feedback loop refined over millennia. Evolution didn't just give you survival, it gave you reflection. You can notice change while it happens. Your dog doesn't ponder his own neuroplasticity, but you do, which is both miraculous and a bit ridiculous. As you glide on, the neural terrain pulses brighter, forming patterns reminiscent of constellations. You realize that each connection is a choice repeated until permanent. Gratitude practiced daily strengthens pathways of calm. Resentment strengthens vigilance. Your mind is the weather you rehearse. The thought humbles you into stillness. Historians still debate how monks and mystics from different faiths intuited this long before neuroscience named it. Their disciplines, chanting, meditation, prayer, were all exercises in repetition and focus. Brain scans of modern monks show precisely what they suspected. Meditation thickens the prefrontal cortex, calms the amygdala, and strengthens compassion circuits. Their enlightenment, it seems, is measurable. A gentle current of humour ripples through. Imagine your neurons at a gym, lifting thoughts instead of weights. Some are in peak condition, your favourite skills. Others are the dusty treadmill labelled high school algebra. The brain never stops training. It just prioritises whichever circuits you use most. That's why old habits die hard. They're simply the best conditioned synapses in the room. You rise slowly from this luminous construction site, watching the scaffolding rearrange itself in elegant motion. There's comfort in knowing that nothing within you is truly fixed. Not intelligence, not temperament, not even memory. The brain you fall asleep with tonight will not be exactly the one that wakes tomorrow. Every breath, every word, every moment you choose differently rewires the map. And as you float higher, you can almost feel your neurons whispering their quiet motto, adapt or dissolve. The phrase isn't threatening, it's hopeful. The brain's flexibility is proof that change isn't punishment, it's promise. You leave the chamber glowing slightly brighter than before, already altered by the salunda, the knowledge of your own becoming. You rise from the forest of changing neurons into a bright, bustling metropolis. The brain's energy district. It hums with urgency as though every streetlight and window draws power from the same invisible current. The city feels alive, electric, a constant consumer of fuel. This is where thought meets metabolism, where ideas literally burn calories. You've stepped into the world of energy regulation. The reason that this 3-pound organ quietly devours about 20% of everything you eat. At first glance, it doesn't make sense. The brain is only 2% of your body weight, yet it's hungrier than your muscles, your heart, even your digestive tract. Every flicker of awareness, every daydream or decision requires a rush of glucose and oxygen. You can almost hear the flow now, arteries pulsing like subway tunnels, delivering sugar to synapses. Neurons fire, mitochondria flare, ATP molecules churn out energy like tiny power stations. Historians still argue whether early philosophers who spoke of vital spirits moving through the body were poetically describing this same invisible current of oxygen and sugar that fuels thought. A mainstream fact, the brain cannot store its own energy for long. Unlike muscles, it has no glycogen reserve. It lives paycheck to paycheck, metabolically speaking, demanding constant delivery from the bloodstream. When levels dip, the consequences are swift: confusion, fatigue, even fainting. That's why skipping breakfast can make your mind foggy, or why long meetings without snacks feel like philosophical torture. Your neurons are simply underfed. You wander along one of the glowing vascular highways that lace the cortex. Capillaries branch into finer and finer filaments until they resemble lacework, threading through every crevice. Each heartbeat sends out a wave of oxygenated blood that lights the tissue crimson for a fraction of a second before fading. Functional MRI machines track this exact phenomenon, blood flow as a proxy for thought. You're watching the same mechanism scientists use to watch you. The smell of ozone fills the air, and you realize it's not smell at all. It's static from countless synapses firing simultaneously. Every electrical impulse requires ions, sodium, potassium, calcium rushing across membranes. Tiny molecular doors open and close in perfect rhythm. The cost of this ballet is steep, around 20 watts at rest, the energy of a dim light bulb. You chuckle at the old joke that if thoughts were electricity, you could power your phone by worrying. Sadly, the conversion rate isn't great. Deeper in the metabolic maze, you encounter glial cells again, specifically astrocytes working overtime. They shuttle glucose from blood to neurons, cleaning up stray ions like meticulous accountants. Without them, the neural economy would crash in seconds. A quirky tidbit surfaces. During intense focus, your brain's energy use barely rises above baseline. Most of that 20% isn't spent on conscious thought, but on maintenance, keeping billions of neurons alive, resetting ions, repairing membranes. The brain is like a city that spends more on infrastructure than spectacle. You float past the hypothalamus, that ancient regulator of appetite and balance. It constantly monitors blood sugar, temperature, hydration. When the brain senses shortage, it doesn't politely request food, it orchestrates craving, fatigue, irritability, its version of a tantrum. The hangry feeling is simply your prefrontal cortex running low on glucose, while your amygdala seizes the microphone. Historians still argue whether early fasting rituals were spiritual discipline, or just the side effects of hungry brains hallucinating enlightenment. A faint golden shimmer catches your attention, the mitochondria within neurons. They're tiny, bean-shaped, and utterly relentless. These little factories convert glucose into ATP, the energy coin of life. Each thought you think spends billions of these coins. Over time, mitochondrial wear contributes to aging. When they slow, cognition dulls, reaction time lengthens. Yet exercise, sleep, and certain foods coax them into vitality again. Your brain's currency can be minted anew if only you invest wisely. Then there's oxygen, the brain's other addiction. Within minutes of deprivation, neurons begin to die. You picture the brainstem ensuring that every breath continues no matter what else you forget. Even dreaming depends on oxygen. Climbers at high altitude often report vivid hallucinations, their oxygen-starved brains weaving phantom sounds and visions. The line between reality and dream blurs when fuel runs low. You drift toward the front of the brain where the prefrontal cortex works tirelessly on executive decisions, whether to save, to spend, to plan. It consumes massive energy for its size. The act of self-control, resisting a snack, biting back a snarky comment, literally burns glucose. That's why willpower feels draining. It is draining. The brain spends energy on restraint the way muscles spend it on lifting. You're metabolically paying for every polite smile. A quirky historical footnote floats by. During the French Revolution, physicians noted that guillotined heads sometimes blinked for seconds. They assumed lingering consciousness. In truth, it was residual energy discharge. Even in death, the brain burns its last reserves, sparks fading into silence. Energy is the final thing it relinquishes. You sense how fragile balance is. Too little fuel and the mind falters, too much, and blood sugar spikes fog perception. Modern life's constant stimulation keeps neurons firing when they should rest. Sleep is when the brain repays its energy debts. During deep stages, neurons fall into synchronized slow waves, consuming less power, while glial cells flush away metabolic waste. Skip sleep long enough and the buildup of adenosine and toxins turns thought sluggish, emotional control frayed. You've felt it. That cotton-headed fatigue after a sleepless night when coffee only delays the crash. A fringe theory drifts through the circuitry. Some neuroscientists wonder if energy efficiency, not intelligence, was the real driver of evolution. Brains that managed information with less fuel might have outlasted those that burned too hot. Perhaps consciousness as itself is nature's compromise between complexity and thrift, a low-power mode for survival. You smile at the thought of being an energy-saving species. Humour stirs again. Somewhere in this glowing city, a neuron complains about unpaid overtime, another about caffeine shortages. The brain, you realise, runs on a budget tighter than any government. It prioritises constantly, trimming non-essentials when energy dips. That's why stress feels like tunnel vision. Resources are rerouted to immediate survival, leaving creativity on standby. You move through the cortex one final time, tracing the steady heartbeat of fuel and fire. Every emotion, memory, and epiphany depends on this constant supply. The next time you forget a word mid-sentence, remember it's not laziness. It's an energy hiccup. Your neurons are pausing for breath. As the city's lights pulse gently, you feel awe for this quiet machinery. Thought is combustion. Awareness, a candle fed by sugar and air. When you inhale, you stoke that flame. When you eat, you feed it. When you rest, you let it cool but never go out. You are quite literally powered by wonder. The hum of the brain's energy city softens, and you find yourself gliding into a dim corridor where sensation becomes raw, where electricity translates not into colour or sound, but into feeling. The atmosphere thickens here, vibrating faintly between comfort and pain. You've entered the somatosensory system's shadowed theatre, the neural stage where pleasure and suffering share the same spotlight. It's quieter than the sensory orchestra was, but far more intimate. Every flicker of pain, every brush of warmth, every phantom itch begins here, shaped and rewritten, before it ever reaches your awareness. At first, the space seems divided. One side glows golden, radiant with calm. The other pulses red, like coals that never cool. Yet, as you drift closer, the line between them blurs. Pleasure and pain are siblings, not opposites. They live along the same neural highway. The difference lies in intensity, in the signals your brain chooses to amplify. Touch a hand too softly and the brain hums in delight. Press too hard and the same receptors scream. Historians still argue whether early thinkers like Epicurus understood this duality when they describe pleasure as merely the absence of pain, a theory surprisingly close to modern neuroscience. A mainstream fact: all pain is born not in the body but in the brain. The nerves transmit danger signals, yes, but it's here, inside this labyrinth, that sensation becomes suffering. Pain is not an objective event, but an interpretation, one that can be dialed up or down by context, emotion, even expectation. That's why soldiers in battle sometimes feel nothing until the danger passes, and why a paper cut can sting like betrayal once you finally look at it. The prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the insula all collaborate, deciding how much attention to grant the injury. It's theatre, not physics. You pass through a doorway lined with shimmering threads, the ascending pathways of the spinal cord, climbing toward consciousness. Each thread carries signals from receptors scattered across your skin and muscles: pressure, temperature, vibration, damage. At the top, the thalamus stands like a switchboard operator, routing these messages to the somatosensory cortex. Touch your elbow, and a specific cortical patch lights up. Burn your tongue, and another flares. The brain has a complete map of your body tattooed upon its surface. You can almost see it, a glowing silhouette stretched across the cortex like a constellation of nerves. Then, without warning, the scenery shifts. A strange echo fills the air, the unmistakable sensation of pain with no source. Phantom limbs appear, arms, legs, fingers made of light but feeling oddly real. You've stepped into one of neuroscience's great mysteries. When someone loses a limb, the brain's map doesn't update immediately. It keeps the missing territory active. Neurons that once processed signals from the hand may now respond to the face or shoulder, causing the brain to feel an absent limb. Historians still argue whether this phenomenon was first documented by soldiers in the Civil War, or by earlier physicians who couldn't explain why patients felt haunted by what wasn't there. A fringe theory glimmers nearby, that phantom sensations are not just misfires but evidence of the brain's stubborn refusal to forget the body. Some researchers think the self-image, the inner map of me, is so deeply embedded that even amputation can't erase it. The phantom becomes proof of identity's persistence. You glance at your own glowing outline here in this neural theatre and wonder how much of you is memory pretending to be flesh. Pleasure re-enters the scene softly, balancing the weight of all this ache. Neurons in the nucleus accumbens and orbitofrontal cortex sparkle like champagne bubbles. Here lies the circuitry of reward, activated not only by joy but by relief. Pain ends, and the brain floods itself with dopamine and endorphins, the chemical confetti of survival. It's the reason healing feels euphoric, why release can feel like ecstasy. The same circuits light up for laughter, music, even a well-timed hug. The border between agony and bliss is thinner than anyone suspects. You float past a series of shimmering corridors labelled by function. Nociceptors for pain, mechanoreceptors for touch, thermoreceptors for heat and cold. The names sound sterile, but each one translates the world into feeling. Without them, life would be sterile too. There are rare individuals born with congenital insensitivity to pain. They never feel injury, and as a result often harm themselves without knowing. Pain, cruel as it seems, is the body's most loyal messenger. It pleads, it warns, it protects. You can almost hear it whispering now, "I am not your enemy, I am your alarm." Historians still debate when humanity began trying to silence that alarm. Ancient Sumerians used opium poppies, Egyptians mixed vinegar and willow bark. Victorian surgeons experimented with ether. Each era sought mercy, yet the balance was delicate, too much numbness and the body forgot how to live. Modern anesthesiology perfected the art, turning pain on and off like a switch. But even today, chronic pain remains one of medicine's great riddles, the brain inventing suffering long after the wound has healed. A gentle humour rises in you, how the brain, in its effort to protect, sometimes overdoes it. Thanks for the memo you imagined telling your neurons, but the stubbed toe situation resolved hours ago. The brain doesn't laugh, it's too busy monitoring signals, reluctant to let go. Yet paradoxically, laughter itself dulls pain. Studies show that a good laugh releases endorphins, the same opioids your body makes to soothe hurt. You grin in the dim light here, realizing your brain can literally laugh pain away, at least for a moment. In the next chamber, you sense empathy, the mirror version of pain. Watching someone wince activates the same circuits in your own brain. You feel their pain, not metaphorically, but neurologically. The boundary between self and other blurs, proving that compassion is built into biology. Perhaps this is why art, storytelling, and even simple kindness endure. They let us share neural storms safely. Toward the back of the hall, the red and gold lights merge into pale rose, fading into calm. You realize that the pain circuits and pleasure circuits are constantly learning from each other. Touch can heal because it rewrites the body's map, teaching the brain that safety still exists. That's why gentle pressure, warmth, or even mindful breathing can ease pain. Each sends new data up the line, updating the script. You pause at the threshold before leaving this chamber, the air warm against your skin. Here, sensation is both curse and gift, the proof that you are alive. Without pain, you'd have no boundary. Without pleasure, no motivation. Together they keep you tethered to the present moment, reminding you where you begin and where the world begins to press back. You exhale slowly. The red glow dims to pink, then to gold. The signals quiet, but they never stop. Somewhere within you, neurons still hum with tiny aches and tiny joys, constantly rewriting what it means to feel. You drift upward once more, leaving the rose-coloured pulse of pain and pleasure behind. And soon the neural landscape begins to vibrate with rhythm and resonance. You've entered the world of language, the brain's most elaborate invention, a system of sounds that became symbols, symbols that became stories, and stories that became civilizations. The walls here shimmer like printed paper made of light. Each pulse of energy forms syllables that drift like smoke. You can almost hear whispers in every direction, voices from every age, from cave walls to keyboards, all echoing through the same circuitry that lets you speak, read, and dream in words. Language begins in the left hemisphere for most people, in two famous neighbourhoods. Broca's area in the frontal lobe and Wernicke's area in the temporal lobe. They are like partners in a delicate dance. Broca shapes the rhythm and grammar of speech. Wernicke fills it with meaning. Together, they turn the chaotic thought into ordered sound. If either region falters, the dance stumbles. Damage to Broca's area leaves a person understanding language but struggling to form words, a frustrating silence trapped behind an intact mind. Damage to Wernicke's area produces fluent but nonsensical speech, words beautifully arranged but empty of sense. You drift between the two, feeling the strange electricity of communication, the miracle of meaning bridging one mind to another. Historians still argue whether language began as gesture or sound. Some believe our ancestors spoke first with their hands, not their tongues, and that speech evolved later from the pantomime of survival. Others claim it began with song, that rhythm preceded syntax, that humans sang before they spoke. Either way, your brain treats language as both motor skill and music. The same neurons that fire when you speak also pulse when you listen, as if echoing another person's voice within your own. A mainstream fact, taught reading is not instinctive. Unlike vision or hearing, no region of the brain evolved specifically for it. Instead, when writing appeared about 5,000 years ago, humans repurposed parts of the visual cortex for decoding letters. You can almost see it now, the visual word form area glowing faintly behind your left temple, transforming lines and loops into meaning. It's one of evolution's greatest magic tricks, turning shapes into thought. The next time you read a sentence and feel emotion rising, remember, it's not the words that move you, but the neurons reconfiguring themselves in their honor. You glide past glowing clusters of neurons firing in perfect rhythm. These are mirror neurons, tiny mimics that activate not only when you perform an action, but when you watch someone else perform it. They make you yawn when others do, flinch at another's pain, smile reflexively in shared joy. Some researchers think they're the foundation of empathy and communication, the reason language ever worked. Your brain literally rehearses other minds to understand them. You aren't just listening, you're participating. A quirky tidbit floats by. When you speak aloud, your brain predicts the sound of your own voice milliseconds before it reaches your ears. It's an internal echo cancellation system, ensuring you're not startled by yourself. Schizophrenic hallucinations may arise in part when this prediction falters. The brain hears its own inner monologue as foreign. Words, it seems, can become ghosts if timing goes wrong. You drift into the auditory cortex where speech becomes sound waves again. Each word is dissected into frequency, pitch, and tone, then sent to different areas for decoding. That's why sarcasm and sincerity can sound identical, yet mean opposite things. The right hemisphere steps in here, interpreting tone and subtext. Your brain is bilingual. The left speaks logic, the right speaks poetry. Together, they prevent you from confusing "I'm fine" with "actual fine." Historians still argue whether the Tower of Babel story, a myth of linguistic fragmentation, symbolizes humanity's loss of shared understanding or its triumph in diversity. Neuroscience offers a gentler view. All languages, despite differences, activate similar brain networks. The syntax of Mandarin and English, Swahili and Icelandic, all light up the same circuitry. Beneath every accent lies a shared architecture, a universal grammar in flesh and electricity. You pass through the arcuate fasciculus, a glowing white bridge connecting Broca's and Wernicke's areas. Every sentence you utter crosses this shimmering cable. In some people it's thicker, giving them an ear for rhythm or eloquence. In others, thinner, leading to stumbles or stutters. But the bridge is alive. It can strengthen with practice. That's why reading aloud or singing trains speech. Repetition literally builds infrastructure. The brain is always renovating. A fringe theory lingers in one corner, humming like static. That language doesn't merely express thought, it creates it. This is the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, the idea that the words you know shape the world you perceive. Cultures with no word for blue, for example, once struggled to distinguish it from green. Languages with gendered nouns subtly alter perception of objects' qualities. Whether or not the theory is fully true, it raises a chilling and beautiful idea: vocabulary as destiny. You live inside the grammar you speak. You glide onward through waves of rhythm and rhyme. Music and language intertwine here. They share syntax, pitch, and emotion. Singing activates speech circuits while softening the emotional ones. That's why lullabies calm infants before they understand a single word. Music is pre-linguistic empathy, meaning without definition. Your ancestors likely sang to communicate long before they debated philosophy. You pause to watch neurons light up as you imagine speaking. The brain fires almost identically, whether you say the words aloud or silently rehearse them. Inner speech is as real neurologically as external speech, only quieter. That constant voice in your head, it's your language network practicing infinity. You're narrating your own existence sentence by sentence. Humor surfaces gently. Your inner narrator could use an editor. Sometimes it replays old arguments. Sometimes it insists on narrating you brushing your teeth like a BBC documentary. But without it, you'd lose continuity. The chatter is coherence, the glue of consciousness. In another chamber, bilingualism glows like twin suns. People fluent in multiple languages show increased density in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the region that manages switching tasks and inhibiting impulses. Their brains juggle words as easily as emotions. Some even report feeling slightly different personalities in each language, as if words sculpt temperament. Finally, you pass a wall lined with flickering glyphs, ancient symbols evolving into alphabets. Each one hums softly, connected to the visual word form area, like a timeline of human cognition. From pictographs to emojis, language circles back to images again. Maybe progress is cyclical. The brain loves pictures as much as prose. As you leave, 1,000 whispers trail you. Poems, conversations, confessions, all living echoes of this neural cathedral. Language isn't just a tool, it's an organ, an extension of thought that reaches beyond the skull. Every word spoken tonight, every story remembered or imagined, reshapes this glowing landscape. You don't just use language, you are language, forever translating your private electricity into sound, into connection. You leave the cathedral of language, its murmuring echoes fading behind you, and soon drift into a chamber where the very air seems to bend around your awareness. Time feels different here, stretched, compressed, sometimes looping back on itself like a reel of film stuck in the projector. This is the brain's hidden clock, the quiet architect of your sense of duration and identity. Every moment you have ever lived has passed through this invisible mechanism, turning seconds into stories, stories into self. You hover near its center now, feeling your consciousness flicker with the rhythm of passing time. The first thing you notice is that time inside the brain is not steady. It pulses, it wavers, it dances to the beat of attention. When you're bored, minutes sprawl endlessly like desert roads. When you're absorbed, hours vanish in a blink. The brain measures time not by clocks but by change, by how much information it processes. The more novelty, the slower time seems to move. That's why childhood feels infinite. Every experience is new, every sight unprecedented. Adulthood, efficient but repetitive, blurs the edges of time. Historians still argue whether early philosophers like St. Augustine intuited this truth when he said, "What then is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I wish to explain it, I know not." Even the ancients felt the elasticity of their own perception. A mainstream fact, the brain's primary timekeeper, is a small structure deep within, the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus. It's your circadian pacemaker responding to light and darkness, regulating sleep, hunger, temperature. But other smaller clocks scatter across the brain. The cerebellum tracks milliseconds for movement. The basal ganglia handles seconds for rhythm. The prefrontal cortex guesses minutes for planning. Together they weave a tapestry of temporal awareness. You're a creature of clocks, many ticking at once. You can almost see them now, glowing orbs beating in different tempos like lanterns on a shoreline. They sync imperfectly. And that imperfection is why time sometimes drags or flies. A sudden jolt of adrenaline speeds everything. Your perception sharpens, seconds stretch. Danger slows the world to slow motion. In moments of fear or awe, the amygdala floods the system, forcing more data into each instant. That's why traumatic memories feel frozen in time. Your brain recorded too much. You drift through the parietal cortex, where researchers believe the brain constructs a continuous now from discrete slices of perception. Your reality, it turns out, is always a fraction of a second old, a constant playback of recent history, stitched into seamless flow. The world you feel as present is already past. Still, your consciousness insists it's current. Like a movie projected at 24 frames per second, you laugh softly, realizing your brain is a skilled illusionist. Then something subtler stirs. The default mode network, that constellation of brain regions that lights up when you're not focused outward, when you daydream, recall, or imagine the future. It's the seat of narrative self, the inner storyteller who says, I am the one who did that, and I will do the next. The brain's sense of time and sense of self are intertwined. To exist, you must remember having existed. Without memory, identity dissolves. That's why people with severe amnesia can live in perpetual present, conscious but unanchored, like minds floating untethered from chronology. You wander farther and encounter the insula, another clock of sorts, one that measures internal time. It tracks heartbeat, breath, hunger, temperature. When you meditate, you're listening to this clock, counting not minutes but sensations. Yogis and monks who seem to slow time may simply be tuning inward, aligning their awareness with this internal metronome. Historians still debate whether ancient mystics who spoke of eternal now were describing spiritual transcendence or just exquisite interoceptive timing. A quirky fact flickers through the neurons. Time perception can be hacked. Psychedelic substances, for example, disrupt the brain's predictive circuits, causing time to fracture or loop. Seconds can feel like centuries, or eternity can condense into a heartbeat. Even caffeine and fatigue alter the tempo. Sleep-deprived brains overestimate intervals. As though life drags when tired. Every chemical, every emotion, every thought bends your personal timeline. You never truly experience time itself, only your brain's edited version. As you hover, the air ripples again, and memories begin to unfold like photographs developing in reverse. The hippocampus hums softly, replaying your life in flashes, childhood laughter, heartbreak, the smell of rain on pavement, the quiet triumphs no one else saw. Each memory anchors you in time, proving you've moved from there to here. Without memory, time would have no direction. It would swirl aimlessly, a snow globe shaken forever. You reach for one memory, an ordinary afternoon, sunlight through leaves, and realize that recalling it changes it. The neural path brightens, strengthens, overwrites the old version. The more you revisit the past, the more you alter it. Time in the brain is not linear, but recursive. You're editing your autobiography with every recollection. Maybe that's why nostalgia feels so tender. It's not longing for the past, but for the last time you remembered it. A faint humour stirs. You think of those moments when time behaves rudely, like during small talk at parties or on hold with customer service. The brain's clocks rebel when deprived of stimulation, stretching seconds like taffy. Conversely, a good movie or a kiss compresses hours to minutes. Your neurons adore novelty. They measure time by surprise. Historians still argue whether Einstein's theory of relativity influenced early 20th century artists to experiment with non-linear time in literature and film. Neuroscience now provides the missing link. Perception itself is relative, sculpted by emotion and attention. Even without physics, your brain bends space-time daily, simply by caring or not caring. And then, within this warped corridor of seconds and centuries, you stumble upon something deeper, the self that perceives all of it. The voice that says, I. Where does it live? Scientists point to networks, not single locations, the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate, the temporoparietal junction. Together they generate self-reference, the mind's mirror. But when these areas quiet, as in deep meditation or moments of awe, ego dissolves and time with it. You become awareness without boundary, the observer without clock. Some call this enlightenment. Others call it temporary network suppression. Both may be right. You hover there for a long moment, or maybe no time at all, watching your thoughts drift like clouds across an endless sky. The illusion of minutes and hours fades, replaced by something wider, presence itself. The brain, ever dutiful, will rebuild time once you return to assemble chronology for convenience. But here, in this still chamber, you sense the truth. Time is a function, not a fact, identity, a pattern, not a person. The neurons hum, content. When you finally move again, the lights resume their steady rhythm. Seconds return, heartbeat by heartbeat. You glance back once, toward that timeless space, and whisper a quiet thank you to the clocks, the memories, the illusions that let you call yourself you. The sensation of time dissolves behind you like mist as the neural landscape brightens once again, this time with colours too vivid to exist anywhere but here. The walls shimmer with fractal shapes and soft pulses of light, forming figures that shift from idea to image to possibility. You realise you've stepped into imagination's domain, the borderland between reality and invention, where waking thought borrows the tools of dreaming. Every creative impulse you've ever had, every daydream, hallucination and flash of genius flickered to life in this glowing expanse. It's not a library of what is, it's the workshop of what could be. The first thing you notice is how familiar this place feels. It resembles the dream factory you visited earlier, but the lights burn steadier here, guided not by sleep but by will. The prefrontal cortex hums quietly above, directing traffic between memory and emotion, logic and fantasy. It's the conductor of your inner symphony, blending pieces of reality into something new. You can almost sense it now, the flow of creativity moving from the temporal lobes, where memories are stored, to the frontal regions, where they're rearranged into art, invention, or nonsense. Historians still argue whether early thinkers like Leonardo da Vinci somehow intuited this neural choreography when they described imagination as the marriage of experience and curiosity. A mainstream fact, imagination activates almost the same regions as perception. When you picture an apple, your visual cortex lights up as though you are actually seeing it. When you rehearse a conversation in your head, your language centers and auditory cortex join in, performing the scene. To imagine, then, is to simulate reality from the inside out. Your brain doesn't distinguish much between seeing and imagining. It only adjusts the brightness. That's why visualization can improve athletic performance or ease anxiety. The body believes the rehearsal. You drift through corridors lined with shimmering neural webs, each one a possible idea. A few glow faintly, half-formed thoughts waiting for courage. Others blaze brightly, complete, pulsing with innovation. Some die quietly, unchosen. Imagination, you realize, is generous but selective. It offers countless routes, knowing you'll only take one. The others remain here, the ghosts of unmade possibilities. Somewhere ahead, the lights begin to flicker in rhythm, forming images that morph faster than thought. A wheel turning into a planet, a face blending into a flower, a melody taking shape as colour. This is the visual association area, where metaphors become visible, where one thing stands in for another. It's the birthplace of art and hallucination alike. When the brain loosens its grip on ordinary logic, through fatigue, fever, or certain chemicals, these associations break free, flooding consciousness in surreal kaleidoscope. Historians still argue whether ancient shamans and prophets who saw visions in fire and trance were simply early explorers of this same neural territory. A fringe theory shimmers nearby, whispering that imagination might not just use the brain, but extend beyond it. Some cognitive scientists have suggested that creativity could be a distributed process, part neural, part social, part environmental. Your ideas, they say, are not entirely yours. They are co-authored by the language you speak, the culture you breathe, the memories you borrow. The muse may be real, just not mystical, an emergent property of millions of brains interacting. You smile at the thought that imagination might be contagious. You pass a region glowing gold and blue, the default mode network again, that daydream engine that hums when focus relaxes. It's where the mind wanders, connecting dots no one else thought related. When you stare out a window and zone out, this network is busy recombining memories, testing hypotheticals. Great insights often arrive here, uninvited. When the conscious mind finally stops trying, creativity loves idleness, it's allergic to force. That's why ideas strike in showers, walks, and traffic jams. The brain is free to play. A small spark dances near the hippocampus, the bridge between memory and imagination. Every imagined future borrows materials from the past. When you picture next summer's plans, where your brain reuses memory circuits, editing details to fit new scenarios. In that sense, imagining the future is remembering forward. You can feel it now, that tug of temporal symmetry, yesterday and tomorrow, stored in the same code. Humour bubbles up in this bright space now as part of creativity's DNA. Jokes, after all, are micro-stories that twist expectation. The same circuitry that solves puzzles crafts punchlines. You chuckle softly, imagining neurons trading setups and punchlines like improv comedians. A prefrontal cortex walks into a bar, one says. The amygdala groans, but the hippocampus laughs anyway. You drift toward a faint vibration, a melody forming from neural rhythm. Music is imagination's purest dialect. Pattern without word, emotion without translation. Brain scans show composers and listeners share similar activations. imagination and empathy merge. Music lets one person's internal simulation inhabit another's mind perfectly. It's the most telepathic thing humans do. Nearby, the parietal lobe flares, where mental imagery becomes spatial navigation. Here, imagination gives structure to abstraction. The shape of an argument, the geometry of a dream. Architects and mathematicians live here, visualizing spaces that don't yet exist. Even moral imagination, empathy itself, relies on this ability to place oneself in another's position, literally and figuratively. Historians still debate what imagination truly is: divine spark, evolutionary tool, or side effect of too many neurons. Evolutionary psychologists argue it gave early humans an edge, the power to simulate dangers before facing them. Others claim it's a byproduct, an accident of overdeveloped memory. Either way, it's your brain's most generous glitch. The air grows softer as you near the far wall, where imagination and delusion meet. The boundary is porous. Too little creativity and life dulls into routine. Too much, and the line between real and imagined dissolves. Schizophrenia, for example, can overactivate association networks, producing vivid but uncontrolled imagery. The same circuits that write poetry can also whisper hallucinations. The brain walks a tightrope, balancing invention against coherence. A warm glow catches your attention. Curiosity's spark. It's dopamine again, rewarding novelty, urging exploration. Curiosity feeds imagination like wind feeds fire. Without it, ideas suffocate. You feel it rise within you now, that familiar itch to wonder, to build, to ask. Even this journey through your brain is imagination at work, the mind pretending to explore itself. You float higher, watching the glowing patterns fade into a vast field of dim lights. Each neuron here holds potential, quiet but ready. The mind's canvas stretches endlessly, waiting for color, sound, story. You realize imagination isn't limited to artists or dreamers, it's the default state of consciousness. Every plan, every wish, every moment of empathy is creative. Before you go, you glance back one last time. The workshop hums softly, its walls breathing with unspent ideas. Somewhere, deep inside your own cortex, another dream stirs, ready to be born. You smile, knowing the universe you carry behind your eyes is infinite, and you've only begun to imagine it. You glide away from the dream-bright workshop of imagination and descend into a softer glow, the glow of others. The air itself feels warm here, vibrating faintly with laughter, sighs and whispers, as though the neurons themselves remember the presence of company. You've arrived at the social brain, the network that makes you human not alone but together. The lights around you pulse in patterns of empathy and recognition, tiny echoes of faces, gestures, and voices you've known. Every bond, every friendship, every heartbreak began here, written in neural code. You realize with a strange tenderness that even solitude is social. Your brain keeps simulating people long after they're gone. You step onto a field of mirror neurons, the most poetic circuitry evolution ever produced. They fire when you act, and they fire again when you watch someone else act. The same cells lighting for both doing and seeing. This mirroring is how you learn to smile as a baby, how you flinch when someone stubs a toe, how you instinctively mimic yawns in sympathy. The brain blurs the boundary between self and other because it evolved to belong. Historians still argue whether early hominids survived less because of strength and more because of synchronized hearts and shared attention. The first tribes, they say, were neural before they were social. A mainstream fact: when you look at another person's face, dozens of specialized regions light up in milliseconds. The fusiform gyrus decodes identity, the superior temporal sulcus tracks gaze and motion, the amygdala evaluates trust or threat. All this happens before you consciously decide what to feel. Your brain reads faces the way the rest of your body reads temperature, constantly, automatically. No wonder masks, sunglasses, or even slight delays in video calls make you uneasy. They interrupt the rhythm your social circuits crave. You walk further and sense waves of oxytocin drifting through the air, the same chemical that bonds mothers to infants, friends to friends, lovers to lovers. It floods the system during touch, eye contact, and even shared laughter. It's chemistry with a purpose, trust. But oxytocin isn't all tenderness. It's selective. It heightens empathy for us while sometimes dimming compassion for them. The same molecule that makes you generous within your tribe can make you suspicious of strangers. Nature, ever practical, optimizes connection, not perfection. The room expands into a landscape of glowing threads linking neuron to neuron, like handshakes. This is theory of mind, the ability to imagine another person's thoughts. The temporoparietal junction hums as it simulates perspective, guessing motives, predicting emotions. It's what lets you tell when someone is joking or hiding sorrow behind a polite smile. You can almost hear these circuits whispering stories about everyone you know. They said this, but maybe they meant that. It's exhausting sometimes, but without it, empathy wouldn't exist. People with damage to these regions often lose the ability to infer others' feelings, drifting through social life like astronauts without gravity. You pause near a cluster of neurons firing in rhythm to laughter, an odd musical pattern that scientists have nicknamed the tickle circuit. Shared laughter, it turns out, synchronizes breathing and heart rate between people. You literally fall into rhythm with others when you laugh together. Humor is neurological glue, bridging differences faster than logic ever could. Maybe that's why evolution kept it around. You smile at the thought. The universe's most advanced primate still bonds through giggles. A quirky historical detour shimmers nearby. In the 18th century, physicians debated whether emotions could spread like disease. They observed hysteria and joy rippling through crowds, calling it contagion of the nerves. Centuries later, neuroscience confirmed the metaphor. Emotional contagion is real. Mirror neurons and limbic resonance synchronize moods within groups. You don't just empathize, you absorb. That's why crowds chant, why concerts feel euphoric, why a friend's calm can settle your pulse. Brains are porous, constantly sinking. Historians still argue whether civilization itself was built by this neural synchrony, villages forming not just from cooperation, but from shared emotion, collective rhythm. Anthropologists point to drumming, dancing, ritual chanting, ancient ways of aligning nervous systems before language refined it. When people move in unison, their heartbeats literally entrain. Your social brain loves nothing more than to harmonize. You wander through smaller chambers now, where loneliness flickers like static. The anterior cingulate cortex glows here. Pain circuitry activated not by the injury but by rejection. Social pain uses the same neural real estate as physical pain, which explains why heartbreak hurts. The brain doesn't distinguish between lost love and stubbed toe, both demand comfort. That ache in your chest after being ignored isn't metaphor, it's biology reminding you that isolation is dangerous. You evolve to belong, and solitude feels like hunger, yet in moderation solitude heals. The same circuits that crave connection also process self-reflection. When you sit alone in quiet, your default mode network replays social interactions, rehearses future ones, and updates the narrative of who you are. You're never truly isolated. Your brain keeps company with ghosts, possibilities, and internal dialogues. Even your inner voice borrows tones from others. It's part you, part everyone you've ever loved. A fringe theory drifts through. Some scientists suggest consciousness itself might be social, that awareness arises from the brain's need to model other minds. In trying to understand others, you accidentally invented I. Selfhood, in that view, is empathy turned inward. You nod, amused by the paradox. Maybe your individuality is the final byproduct of community. You drift past a small glowing region near the front, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, where moral decisions take shape. Here, emotion and logic negotiate every ethical choice. Empathy argues for compassion. Reason debates fairness. This is where your brain decides when to forgive, when to punish, when to help. Damage this region, and people become coldly rational, moral philosophers stripped of feeling. Keep it intact, and you'll keep struggling beautifully between heart and rulebook. Humor ripples again, somewhere a neuron mutters, "Group project? Good." More like shared suffering, and 1,000 mirror neurons giggle in solidarity. Even annoyance binds us. Even frustration is social currency. The brain would rather argue than be alone. At the far end of the chamber, the lights dim into a gentle collective pulse. The rhythm of empathy itself. You feel it vibrate through you, steady and profound, as if every person you've ever met left an electrical fingerprint inside your skull. The social brain keeps their echoes alive. The way someone once said your name kindly, the warmth of laughter shared over nothing important, the ache of goodbyes. Each memory is a bridge still intact. You realize then that being human isn't a solo act. Your brain's design, mirror neurons, oxytocin floods, emotional contagion, ensures you're woven into others by default. Even here, traveling through your mind alone, you're walking on pathways built by every voice that ever reached you. The hum of empathy fades slowly as you drift onward, carrying the pulse of connection in your chest like a quiet second heartbeat. You rise from the glowing warmth of empathy and find yourself floating through a dim chamber painted in shades of twilight blue. The air hums with a rhythm older than thought, steady, patient, tidal. This is where consciousness folds inward, where the brain learns the sacred art of surrender. You have entered the realm of sleep, that nightly reboot that keeps the universe inside your skull from overheating. It's quieter here than anywhere else you've been, yet you can feel immense work being done in silence. Sleep isn't rest, it's maintenance, the mind's most crucial housekeeping ritual. You drift above the hypothalamus, that tiny but mighty regulator you've met before. It's glowing faintly as it releases melatonin from the pineal gland, a hormone that signals the body that night has arrived. Historians still argue whether early civilizations, who worship the pineal as the seat of the soul, somehow sensed its luminous role in sleep and dreams. The pineal secretion rises with darkness, falls with dawn, ticking like an ancient metronome. Your circadian rhythm, anchored into this beat, guides every cell in your body. A mainstream fact, your brain cycles through several stages of sleep every night, each roughly 90 minutes long, non-REM stages that deepen from light, dozing to slow-wave oblivion, followed by REM's bright theatre of dreams. You pass through these levels now, watching neurons slow their chatter, then suddenly flare in synchronized bursts. During slow-wave sleep, memories consolidate. The hippocampus replays the day's experiences like a greatest hits album, deciding what to keep and what to discard. You can almost see the electrical ripples traveling from hippocampus to cortex, engraving knowledge into permanence. Every lesson, every melody, every fact reviewed before bed is being rewoven into identity right now. As you float deeper, the brain's metabolic tempo drops. The glymphatic system, named for the glial cells that run it, switches on. Cerebrospinal fluid rushes through neural channels like a midnight tide, flushing out metabolic waste. Historians still argue whether ancient mystics who emphasized nightly purification rituals were intuitively mirroring this cleansing rhythm. Science only confirmed it recently. The brain literally washes itself while you sleep. Miss a night, and toxins like beta amyloid build up, dulling cognition and fraying emotion. Chronic sleep deprivation doesn't just make you tired, it corrodes memory and mood, molecule by molecule. You hover over the thalamus, the gatekeeper of sensory input. During wakefulness, it floods the cortex with information. During sleep, it closes the gates. That's why the world fades to silence. You're disconnected on purpose. Yet some signals sneak through. A baby's cry, a loud crash, a name whispered near your ear. The brain remains vigilant, one ear pressed to the dark. Evolution, after all, never trusted complete surrender. A soft vibration surrounds you, the transition to REM sleep. The cortex reignites, glowing like a city under storm clouds. The brainstem paralyzes muscles to keep the dreamer safe from acting out imagination. Yet the eyes dart rapidly beneath their lids, tracking the phantoms playing inside. You're watching yourself dream from the outside now, and it's beautiful. Fragments of memory rearranged into improbable stories, emotional rehearsal disguised as nonsense. A fringe theory glows faintly in the mist. Some scientists propose that REM sleep evolved to preserve sanity, that dreaming serves as emotional defragmentation. Each night, your amygdala reprocesses fear, your prefrontal cortex rewrites understanding, your hippocampus tests alternate endings to the day's anxieties. Dreams may not predict the future, but they certainly prepare you for it. You drift through the brainstem's ponds where REM signals originate, then upward through the visual cortex, watching images bloom like ink in water. Familiar faces appear and melt, spaces distort, timelines fold. The default mode network is in charge again, mixing imagination with memory. It's theatre therapy at its finest, your subconscious throwing a costume party to process unresolved emotions. In another chamber, neurons pulse slower, calmer, delta waves. You've entered deep sleep, the stage most essential for restoration. Growth hormone releases here, repairing tissues, strengthening the immune system, while rejuvenating mind and body alike. If REM is psychological maintenance, deep sleep is physical repair. You can almost hear your body sigh in gratitude. A quirky historical fact shimmers through the neural haze. Before artificial light, humans often slept in 2 shifts, with a first sleep and second sleep separated by a quiet, wakeful hour. Diaries from the Middle Ages mention people praying, reading, even visiting neighbours in that interval. Modern researchers suggest this segmented sleep was natural to circadian rhythm, disrupted only by electricity's long evenings. Perhaps the midnight restlessness you sometimes feel isn't insomnia at all, but an ancestral echo. You wander toward the prefrontal cortex, currently dimmed. It's resting, taking a break from micromanaging reality. That's why you forget your morning coffee or say things you regret when sleep-deprived. The prefrontal cortex is the first to falter. Meanwhile, the amygdala, unchecked, grows more reactive, turning minor frustrations into catastrophes. Studies show that one sleepless night can increase emotional volatility by 60%. The brain without sleep is a drama queen. Humour bubbles up, subtle but true. Maybe that's why toddlers cry over broken crackers. They're just small humans revealing severe sleep deficits. You laugh softly at the thought, feeling your own circuits giggle in empathy. Historians still debate how dreams influenced culture. Ancient Greeks built temples of healing where priests interpreted dreams as messages from gods. Freud saw them as a wish fulfillment. Jung as archetypes whispering from the collective unconscious. Modern neuroscience, more modest, calls them pattern recycling. Yet none can deny their influence. Entire religions, artworks, and scientific breakthroughs trace back to sleep's strange theatre. You pass through one final current, the hypnagogic zone between waking and rest. It's the brain's twilight, lucid fragments of thought, drifting imagery, sudden solutions. Many inventors claim to harvest ideas here, Edison, Dali, Kekulé dreaming of the benzene ring. Creativity loves this threshold, where reason loosens and intuition slips through. At the far edge, dawn's light begins to seep into the neural landscape. The suprachiasmatic nucleus senses it first, dialing down melatonin, raising cortisol, nudging you toward wakefulness. The brain stirs, its tide reversing. Synapses stretch, neurons whisper, "We're back." You can almost feel the world assembling again, vision returning, sound layering, the first thought forming like sunrise, and in that fragile moment between sleep and consciousness, you understand why the mind must rest. Not because it's weak, but because it is ceaseless. To think endlessly would be to burn out the miracle. Sleep then is mercy, a pause written into the circuitry of existence, a nightly rehearsal for renewal. Morning unfolds across the neural horizon, and you rise from the velvet dark of sleep into a landscape washed in pale gold. The neurons hum a little slower here, steady and measured, like the breathing of something older but wiser. This is the aging brain, still radiant, still alive, but tempered by time. You can feel the shift immediately. The lights aren't as blindingly bright as in youth. They flicker with rhythm rather than frenzy. The whole mind seems to exhale, content to move at its own deliberate pace. Aging, contrary to the myths that haunt birthday cards and anti-wrinkle commercials, is not decay so much as reorganization. The brain prunes certain pathways, strengthens others, optimizing for meaning over novelty. It trades speed for subtlety, immediacy for perspective. A mainstream fact, starting in your 30s, the brain's total volume decreases slowly, about 5% per decade. Yet connectivity between distant regions can actually improve, like backroads paved after the highways fade. Historians still argue whether ancient cultures that revered elders sensed this hidden efficiency long before neuroscience measured it. They may have simply noticed that wisdom takes longer routes. You wander through the hippocampus again, now gentler, slower to encode but no less faithful. New neurons still bloom here, though fewer than before. Memory changes form. It becomes selective narrative. Instead of filing every detail, the brain begins to prioritize meaning, the essence of moments, the emotion attached. It's why older people remember feelings better than facts. You can almost see the circuitry rewriting itself, replacing indexes with stories. Forgetfulness then isn't failure, it's editing. Farther along, you find the prefrontal cortex working with quiet precision. It no longer multitasks like a caffeinated octopus. Instead, it chooses its battles. Focus narrows, distractions fall away. The dopamine system, once addicted to novelty, mellows into appreciation. Scientists call this positivity bias, the tendency of older brains to emphasize pleasant memories and downplay negative ones. Evolution may have designed this gentle optimism to make the later years bearable, even joyful. A faint humor glimmers through. Perhaps that's why grandparents forgive so easily. They've literally rewired for grace. You can almost hear the neurons murmuring, "It's fine, kid, I've seen worse." You drift into the white matter highways, noticing small patches where myelin, the fatty insulation around axons, has thinned. Messages travel slower now, but they arrive intact. To compensate, neighbouring shits recruit extra help. Imaging studies show that older adults often use both hemispheres for tasks younger brains assign to one. It's called bilateral activation, a neural duet instead of a solo. The brain, ever resourceful, prefers redundancy to silence. A quirky historical tidbit floats by. The composer Johann Sebastian Bach wrote his most intricate fugues in his later years, even as his eyesight failed. Historians still argue whether age sharpened his pattern-making mind, or whether, freed from visual distraction, his auditory cortex became his cathedral. Either way, his aging brain was not withering, it was condensing genius. You pause beside the amygdala, expecting it to flare as vividly as before, but it glows softly now, less reactive, more contemplative. Emotional volatility diminishes with age. Wisdom, neurologically speaking, is just the prefrontal cortex keeping the amygdala on a shorter leash. Older brains still feel deeply, but they recover faster. The storms pass, the sky clears. The gift of years is emotional weather that finally understands its own patterns. Yet not all changes are gentle. Somewhere in the shadows, plaques and tangles glint ominously. Abnormal protein buildups like rust on delicate machinery. They remind you of the fragility of memory, the cruelty of Alzheimer's and dementia. Here, neurons die in clusters, connections unravel. It's heartbreak at a cellular scale. Still, even in decline, the brain fights. Cognitive reserve, extra connections built over a lifetime of learning, offers resilience. Reading, conversation, curiosity, each is armor against oblivion. You watch as glial cells swarm to repair, microglia cleaning debris with quiet diligence. They can't always keep up, but they try, loyal until the end. Historians still argue whether lifestyle truly staves off decline, but evidence points clearly. Movement, social contact and novelty fuel longevity. The aging brain, like a muscle, survives through use. The best way to stay young, it whispers, is to keep being surprised. You wander through the auditory cortex and catch the echo of a favourite song. Music seems to endure long after words fade. Even late-stage Alzheimer's patients can hum melodies from childhood. Neuroscientists believe rhythm and song live in deeper circuits, protected from erosion. Perhaps that's why old songs make you cry. They bypass the thinning cortex and go straight to the unbreakable core. A fringe theory flickers nearby. Some researchers suggest that as sensory precision declines, the brain compensates by increasing integration, less focus on detail, more on pattern. This could explain intuition in age, the sudden clarity that isn't calculation but synthesis. What young minds achieve through data, older ones achieve through pattern recognition, the quiet magic of accumulated context. You pass the corpus callosum, noticing it has grown slightly thinner, yet the communication feels calmer, almost meditative. The hemispheres no longer compete, they collaborate. Creativity and logic intermingle more fluidly, producing the balanced insight we call wisdom. It's as though the brain, after decades of arguing with itself, finally decided to have a cup of tea and listen. Humour bubbles again. You imagine neurons holding retirement parties, trading anecdotes about youthful overfiring. Remember that time we panicked about a text message? They laugh. Age, in neural terms, is simply experience learning to pace itself. The parietal lobes, custodians of spatial sense, hum softly. Balance becomes tricky. Reflex is slow, but the cerebellum, always adaptable, refines movements, compensating with grace. You're less quick, but more deliberate. Each gesture a small act of mindfulness. The brain's rhythm slows to match the heart's wisdom. And yet, the light here is beautiful. The aging brain radiates a warmth absent in the frantic brilliance of youth. It glows not with speed but with coherence, each part aware of the others. Neuroscientists call this de-differentiation, but it feels more like unity, a coming home of the self. Historians still debate whether consciousness sharpens or dulls with time. Some argue that age narrows perspective, others that it deepens our compassion. Perhaps both are true. The mind becomes a telescope, its view smaller but clearer, focused on what matters. You turn toward the exit of this chamber, feeling neither melancholy nor fear. The aging brain is not an ending, but a soft recalibration, a slower waltz after decades of sprinting. Neurons fire less frequently but more meaningfully, each spark a deliberate word in the long conversation of life. As you ascend, the golden glow behind you flickers once, tenderly. You realize that wisdom isn't a product of time's passage, it's the brain learning, finally, to listen to itself. And as you leave, you whisper thanks to your neurons for aging with such quiet grace. You drift now through a dim corridor where the hum of neurons begins to mingle with a colder, steadier rhythm, a digital one. The glow around you turns sharper, more geometric. The air smells faintly of ozone and static. You've arrived at the frontier where biology meets circuitry, where the brain peers across the abyss at its own reflection in machines. This is the threshold of the brain versus the computer, though versus feels increasingly out of date. The boundaries blur more each year. You can sense it, electricity recognizing itself. The first thing you notice is how similar the patterns look. Neurons and microchips both flicker with on and off signals, binary whispers of yes and no, fire and rest. But the resemblance is deceptive. A silicon transistor processes cleanly, predictably. A neuron deals in chaos and chemistry. Where computers compute, brains improvise. Still, each time you compare their patterns, you feel the gap narrowing. Historians still argue whether the 20th century pioneers of computing, Alan Turing, John von Neumann, foresaw this convergence when they borrowed the brain as metaphor. Their artificial neurons were clumsy then, but the seeds were sown. A mainstream fact, the human brain performs roughly a quintillion, that's a billion operations per second, yet it does so using only about 20 watts of power, the same as a dim light bulb. A supercomputer can outcalculate it, but at the cost of megawatts. Efficiency, not speed, is the brain's true genius. It runs on whispers where machines roar. Still, artificial intelligence keeps climbing closer, building vast neural networks that mimic human learning. You can almost hear them now, digital echoes humming faintly beneath the biological static. You pass through a shimmering field of data streams that look eerily organic, threads of code pulsing like axons. This is deep learning's playground, where algorithms evolve through trial and error, refining themselves with feedback loops reminiscent of synaptic strengthening. The phrase neurons that fire together wire together has become nodes that activate together optimize together. It's a strange poetry, machines borrowing biology's grammar. Yet the brain remains master of nuance. It deals in ambiguity, context, irony. Things code still stumbles over. A computer can recognize a face in a billion images, but it can't yet grasp the warmth behind a smile. It can generate a symphony, but doesn't feel the ache it expresses. Emotion, as you saw earlier, is what gives thought its flavor. Without it, intelligence becomes imitation, accurate but hollow. Still, the line wavers. Every day, algorithms grow better at simulating empathy, writing poetry, even joking. You wonder whether imitation done perfectly enough eventually is the real thing. A flicker to your left draws you toward the motor cortex, where thoughts become movement. Electrodes shimmer here, tiny silver sparks embedded in living tissue. This is the interface, the bridge. Brain-computer interfaces, BCIs, translate neural firing into code, letting paralyzed patients move robotic limbs or type with thought alone. The first successful tests were clumsy, but now people play video games with their minds. The brain, it turns out, adapts quickly to tools. It rewires to include them. When a patient controls a robotic arm, neurons fire as though the arm were flesh. You feel a shiver. The definition of body is quietly expanding. Historians still argue whether this is liberation or dependence. Mary Shelley warned of monsters built from ambition. Modern ethicists worry less about monsters and more about ownership. If thoughts can be read or written by machine, where does privacy end? The hippocampus records memory. But what happens when the cloud backs it up? A strange thought occurs. You might one day leave behind not a diary but a literal download of your mind. The line between immortality and redundancy grows thin. A fringe theory flickers nearby. The simulation hypothesis, the idea that consciousness itself might already be digital, that reality is a program running in cosmic code. Philosophers and physicists debate it endlessly. Neuroscientists roll their eyes but secretly ponder. If everything the brain perceives is an electrical simulation anyway, would it even notice being simulated? The thought curls like smoke in your synapses, neither proven nor dismissed. You float past a familiar figure, the prefrontal cortex, lit by both organic and artificial light. Here, researchers are experimenting with memory prosthetics, chips that can mimic hippocampal firing patterns. Early trials in animals showed restored recall. Human experiments are cautiously beginning. Imagine that, forgetting nothing, replaying every moment perfectly. It sounds like paradise until you remember the mercy of forgetting. The brain's flaws are its protection. Perfection could be a prison. Humour stirs lightly. You imagine neurons gossiping about their new silicon colleagues. They never take coffee breaks, one grumbles, and their uptime is ridiculous. You smile, the old and new worlds teasing each other across the interface. A mainstream fact, the sensory cortex can be tricked by electrical stimulation to feel what isn't there. A phantom touch, a ghostly sound. Virtual reality uses the same principles, feeding the brain data convincing enough to replace the physical world. Already, people lose themselves in simulations so immersive that re-entry to reality feels jarring. The boundary between neural and digital space grows porous. Consciousness seems to wander freely across both. You sense a quiet irony here. The same brain that once feared machines now trains them to think, while simultaneously learning from their efficiency. Neural implants, AI-driven diagnostics, cognitive enhancers, all tools that extend the brain's reach. Perhaps the future isn't man versus machine, but man as machine, merged and rewired. Even now, your own neurons integrate with technology. Every message you send, every algorithm predicting your mood. You're already partly cyborg. The phone in your pocket is an auxiliary lobe of your cortex. Historians still debate whether this merging is progress or peril. The Luddites of old destroyed looms for fear of mechanization. Today's skeptics worry about automating thought itself. Yet others dream of transcendence, uploading consciousness, curing mortality, merging minds into networks vast as galaxies. Between utopia and dystopia lies simple curiosity. The brain has always been driven to replicate itself, first in children, then in machines. You pass through a corridor where neural signals and binary digits intertwine, indistinguishable now. The glow ahead resembles neither flesh nor metal, but something in between, a hybrid light. Warm, yet precise. You can almost hear the two languages merging, electrical impulses translating into code and back again, seamless. The brain doesn't seem threatened. It's curious, playful. Evolution never feared transformation. It only demanded continuation. As you drift onward, the boundary between neuron and transistor fades entirely. You realize the contest was never about superiority. Machines are the brain's latest metaphor for understanding itself. Each new invention, from the abacus to AI, is a mirror held up to cognition. The more we teach machines to think, the closer we come to glimpsing the mystery of thought itself. And as you leave this digital twilight, you feel a quiet reassurance. Whatever form intelligence takes, organic, artificial, or something we can't yet name, it all began with the same spark, the same electric whisper, I wonder. The glow of circuitry fades behind you, replaced by something more elusive, more ancient. The light here isn't static or mechanical, it flickers like candle flame caught in a slow breeze. You've stepped into the edge of knowing, the boundary where science hesitates and wonder begins. This is consciousness, the quiet miracle that turns as a lump of the living matter into you. The air here hums faintly, though with no clear rhythm. You sense awareness not as an object but as a field, surrounding and permeating everything. There are no walls, only the faint shimmer of neurons blinking in slow conversation. The first thing you notice is the silence, not absence of sound, but presence of attention. The brain's chatter, its constant background narration, feels momentarily suspended. You realize that for all its machinery, the billions of neurons, the chemical storms, none of it explains the feeling of being alive. Historians still argue whether early philosophers like Descartes, who declared "I think, therefore I am," recognized this gap between thinking and being. Neuroscience has mapped every contour of the brain, yet consciousness itself remains the ghost in its machinery. A mainstream fact: no single brain region produces awareness. Instead, it emerges from integration, a conversation among the thalamus, cortex, brainstem, and sensory networks. The integrated information theory, one of the leading models, claims that consciousness arises wherever information becomes both richly differentiated and unified. A simple circuit can compute, but only a complex self-referential network can feel. You can almost see it now, waves of neural activity folding back upon themselves, referencing their own patterns, generating the quiet hum of "I am." And yet, other theories whisper through the dark. The global workspace model suggests consciousness is a broadcast, a spotlight of attention illuminating certain thoughts while others remain backstage. Your awareness, then, is not the brain's total symphony, but the solo it happens to feature at this moment. You wonder, amused, whether your sense of self is just a highlight reel your neurons are playing for themselves. You drift through rippling corridors of electric light, each pulse representing a moment of awareness flickering into existence. The lights don't stay on continuously, they strobe, syncing to the brain's rhythmic oscillations, especially in the gamma range around 40 Hz. These tiny electrical harmonies bind perception into continuity. Without them, sight, sound, and thought would scatter like unedited film frames. Consciousness is rhythm, not substance. You move toward the anterior cingulate cortex, glowing a soft rose gold. It monitors attention and error, that subtle awareness of being slightly off balance, the meta layer that knows it's thinking. This self-monitoring feels oddly human. To notice your own noticing, to question even as you act. Perhaps consciousness is this endless loop of curiosity. Historians still argue whether ancient mystics who practiced meditation were probing the same phenomenon long before neuroscience gave it vocabulary. A fringe theory floats by like a drifting lantern. Panpsychism, the idea that consciousness pervades all matter, that every atom carries a spark of awareness scaled to its complexity. It's both poetic and unsettling. If true, the universe isn't filled with consciousness. It is consciousness, experiencing itself through countless forms. The firing of your neurons would then be the cosmos briefly remembering its own existence. Most scientists stay cautious, but the hypothesis refuses to die. You drift deeper into the luminous haze and sense the paradox of studying awareness with the very instrument being studied. It's like a flashlight trying to illuminate itself. Every scientific model you consider, every philosophical argument, eventually turns inward and dissolves. Maybe that's why consciousness feels sacred, even to atheists. It's the one mystery that can't be fully externalized. You can explain the neural correlates, but not the why of experience. Why does red look red? Why does music ache? Why is there someone home behind the eyes? Small laugh bubbles up from somewhere inside you, your brain analyzing its own confusion. Humor thrives even here, because awareness loves paradox. It's like a cat chasing its tail for fun. You think of the old neuroscience joke, if the brain was simple enough for us to understand, we'd be too simple to understand it. The neurons would chuckle too if they could. You glide past the insula where introception, the sense of the body's interior, meets emotional awareness. Here, consciousness feels physical, tethered to heartbeat and breath. The mind is not floating above the body but braided through it, each pulse a reminder that thought is embodied. Meditation studies show that focusing on breath or heartbeat strengthens connectivity between the insular and prefrontal cortex, calming the wandering mind. Perhaps that's why awareness often hides in stillness. The quieter the noise, the more clearly you can hear yourself existing. You move through the posterior cingulate, part of the default mode network, the self-generator. It flickers when you think about your past or imagine your future, and it dims during moments of pure presence. This rise and fall of self-awareness mirrors the ebb and flow of consciousness itself. When the network overfires, anxiety thrives. When it quiets, serenity dawns. Mystics call that silence enlightenment. Neurologists call it decreased DMN activity. Both descriptions fit. Historians still debate whether consciousness evolved as a survival tool or as an accidental byproduct. Some argue that awareness helps anticipate threats by simulating outcomes. Others say it's simply what happens when information becomes too complex to stay mechanical. Either way, it persists, unnecessary for reflexes, but essential for meaning. The brain could move the body without it, but not care. You pause, sensing something profound. Awareness, after all, isn't something you have, it's something you are. Every thought, every perception, every heartbeat arises within it. Even the act of questioning it happens inside it. You realize you've never stepped outside consciousness, only deeper within. The boundary between observer and observed was an illusion all along. A gentle hush falls across the neural sky, the lights slow, blending into a continuous golden glow. You can't tell whether you're watching consciousness or being watched by it. The question feels irrelevant. The experience itself is the answer. And then faintly, like a whisper from somewhere beyond the synapses, a thought arises. Perhaps the brain doesn't create consciousness at all. It receives it, tuning into awareness the way a radio catches a signal. It's a radical idea, one that science hesitates to touch, but as you hover there, weightless inside the radiance, it doesn't seem impossible. Maybe matter and mind are partners, not opposites. Maybe existence itself is a conversation. You let the thought fade, replaced by something simpler, a soft, wordless gratitude. The neurons pulse like candlelight, the circuits sigh like wind, and the awareness that is you stretches just wide enough to hold it all. For a moment, there's no inside or outside, no brain or world, only the quiet truth that consciousness is both the question and the answer. You drift beyond the gold-lit hum of consciousness into a twilight that feels endless, soft, silver, and still. The neurons fade to faint embers, the electrical chatter quiets to a slow, steady pulse. This is the final chamber, the brain's closing act, where everything that was once thought or felt begins to dissolve into quiet. You've arrived at the edge of life itself, where the mind's last sparks flicker against the backdrop of eternity. It isn't frightening here. It's calm, like the hush after a long song. The brain, for all its complexity, knows how to end gracefully. You hover above the brainstem, the first structure to awaken at birth and the last to sleep at death. Its rhythmic glow governs the basics: heartbeat, breath, blood pressure, the pulse of existence. Even as higher regions fade, the brainstem endures, whispering life's instructions to the body. Inhale, exhale, repeat. It's the metronome of being. When it falters, the body follows. Yet even in that final moment, neurons don't all go dark at once. Death, biologically speaking, is a process, a gradual uncoupling of signals, a quiet unraveling rather than a switch flipped. Historians still argue whether ancient healers, who described the soul departing through the breath, somehow sensed this biological truth before science could name it. A mainstream fact. Within seconds of cardiac arrest, the brain's oxygen supply dwindles. Neurons, ever hungry, begin firing erratically, releasing one last surge of synchronized energy. EEG readings have captured it. A burst of high-frequency waves rippling across the cortex, eerily resembling the patterns of intense dreaming or spiritual ecstasy. Some researchers speculate this surge might explain near-death experiences, the tunnel of light, the life review, the feeling of transcendent peace. Others insist it's merely neurochemical chaos, a final storm in the circuitry. The debate continues, as it has for centuries, between the measurable and the mysterious. You float closer to that imagined threshold, where the brain's last flickers paint faint auroras of memory across its surface. Scenes rise and fade, faces, laughter, moments once mundane, now luminous. The hippocampus releases its archives like birds escaping an open cage. The amygdala, ever emotional, softens its alarms. The prefrontal cortex, which spent decades managing, worrying, planning, finally lets go. For once, the mind stops narrating. What remains is presence, pure, effortless awareness. In this stillness, the default mode network, the neural seat of self, dims like a candle under glass. The sense of I evaporates, not violently but tenderly, as if the brain itself understands that separation was always temporary. You watch the body's map dissolve from the sensory cortex, each boundary melting until there's no longer a distinction between inside and out. The awareness that once identified as you widens, becoming something more diffuse, like ink seeping through water. A fringe theory drifts by, delicate as smoke. Some neuroscientists entertain the idea that consciousness might briefly persist after death, sustained by the residual energy or quantum coherence in microtubules within neurons. The Penrose-Hameroff hypothesis, often dismissed yet never entirely disproven, suggests that consciousness could be fundamental to the universe, merely expressed through biology. If so, perhaps awareness doesn't die. It only changes medium, like music played on a new instrument. You find comfort in the thought, even if it's unprovable. The brain has always been more mystery than mechanism. You pass into the temporal lobes, where spiritual experiences are often born. Studies show that electrical stimulation here can induce visions, presences, even feelings of cosmic unity. The brain, it seems, carries divinity within its circuits. Yet as the currents fade, you realize that no stimulation is needed now. The sense of unity arises naturally. The neurons aren't hallucinating, they're dissolving the last illusion of separateness. Historians still argue whether early mystics, describing oneness with the divine, were simply recounting this same neurological release. The hypothalamus glows faintly one last time, releasing endorphins and serotonin, a biochemical farewell gift. Peace floods the body, overriding fear. You sense how merciful biology can be. Evolution designed not just survival, but softness in departure. The final moments for many are tranquil, dreamlike. Pain recedes as consciousness unspools. The mind, having built and rebuilt itself for decades, now disassembles gently. A small flicker of humour passes through, light as static. Even at the end, the brain refuses to waste energy. It's efficient to the very last. You imagine a neuron murmuring, "Let's tidy up before we go," and the others chuckling softly in reply. There's something endearing in that, an organ cleaning its desk before clocking out. You glance back toward the cortex, its once blazing lattice dimming to a constellation of faint lights. The frontal lobes, source of ambition and self-doubt, fade first. The parietal regions, keepers of orientation, follow. The occipital lobes, painters of vision, flicker briefly, perhaps offering one final image, an inner sunrise, a tunnel of light, a memory of sky. Whether symbolic or synaptic, it feels sacred. The brainstem slows, the heart follows, breath becomes shallow, then pauses. Somewhere deep inside, one last electrical wave ripples through the neurons, a silent applause marking the end of performance. Then comes stillness, not absence, but completion. Historians still argue whether consciousness truly ends here or continues in some ineffable form. Science bows politely, admitting its instruments can't measure beyond the flicker. Philosophy steps forward, whispering that maybe the question itself is misplaced, that the mind was never in the brain but through it, the way music passes through a violin. Either way, there's peace in not knowing. You float above the quiet organ now, looking down at the folded labyrinth that once housed every thought, every laugh, every dream. The brain is still beautiful, even Sienten, its intricate wrinkles catching the last traces of light like ripples on a calm sea. You realize it never truly stopped working, it simply handed the story back to the universe. And as the light fades completely, you feel yourself expand beyond the boundary of bone and synapse, weightless and unhurried. Whatever remains, memory, energy, awareness, it drifts outward, like mist dissolving into dawn. The brain's journey is complete, but the mystery continues, infinite as the space between neurons.